The knock came 3 times, sharp, desperate, drowning beneath the howl of wind that tore across the Wyoming frontier. Clara Whitmore froze, her hand trembling above the latch. No one traveled these mountains on Christmas Eve. No one survived the storm that had been raging for 2 days. Yet there he stood when she opened the door. A stranger, tall as shadow, ice crusting his beard, eyes burning with something between exhaustion and determination. "Please," he whispered, swaying, "just tonight." She should have turned him away, should have trusted her fear. Instead, Clara Whitmore made the choice that would shatter everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the promises the dead leave behind. If you want to know whether a widow's mercy becomes her salvation or her ruin, stay with me until the very end. And please, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far Clara's story travels across this world. The cabin sat like a frozen prayer against the shoulder of the mountain, its single window glowing amber in the white violence of the storm. Inside, Clara Whitmore moved through the rituals of loneliness with practiced efficiency, banking the fire, setting the kettle, pulling her shawl tighter against the cold that seeped through every crack in the chinked logs. 25 years old, widowed 4 months. Spending her birthday alone for the 2nd year running, though this time there would be no husband returning from town with ribbon for her hair. Thomas wouldn't be returning at all. She pressed her palm against the frosted window, staring into the blur of snow and darkness. Somewhere beyond that white curtain, the frontier sprawled endlessly, untamed, unforgiving, indifferent to the small human griefs played out in its shadow. Wyoming Territory in 1882 was a land that took more than it gave, and it had taken Thomas Hale without ceremony, without warning, without even the dignity of returning his body home. "Border clash," the telegraph had said. "Regret to inform." 4 words. That's all her marriage had amounted to in the end. Clara turned from the window, refusing the familiar sting of tears. She had cried enough. The grief remained, constant as the mountains, but the tears had run dry weeks ago. Now there was only the hollow ache, the silence, the endless procession of days that looked exactly like this one. She moved to the small table, eyeing the uneaten meal she'd prepared out of habit. Too much for one person, never enough for 2. The venison stew had gone cold hours ago. She should eat, should maintain her strength, should do all the practical things widows were supposed to do to survive another winter alone. Instead, she found herself reaching for the stub of candle on the mantel. It was tradition, something her mother had taught her years ago in Pennsylvania before Clara had followed Thomas west in search of fortune and freedom. "Always leave a light burning on Christmas Eve," her mother had said. "You never know what lost soul might need finding." Clara lit the candle with a splinter from the fire, then placed it carefully in the window. The small flame danced behind the glass, a foolish beacon that would be swallowed by the storm before it reached beyond the porch. But it made her feel less alone somehow, this small act of faith in a world that had given her little reason for faith at all. She was reaching for her sewing basket. Might as well mend the tear in her petticoat, give her hand something to do. When the knock came. 3 times. Deliberate. Strong enough to be heard over the wind's howl. Clara's breath caught. Her hand froze halfway to the basket. No one knocked on her door. Not anymore. The nearest neighbor was 6 miles down the mountain, and old Samuel Pritchard was too weathered to make that journey in good conditions, let alone during a blizzard that had been building fury for 2 straight days. The supply wagon from Hollow Creek wouldn't attempt the mountain road until spring, and anyone with sense would have taken shelter hours ago, not be wandering the high country in darkness with the temperature dropping toward deadly. The knock came again. Weaker this time. Clara stood slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd heard the stories every frontier woman had. Drifters who preyed on isolated homesteads. Deserters from the army forts. Men who saw a lone woman as easy pickings, a warm bed, and whatever supplies they could carry. She moved to the door, pressing her ear against the rough wood. "Please." The voice came muffled through the barrier, male and rough with exhaustion. "I don't mean harm. Just need shelter from the cold." Clara's hand moved to the rifle propped beside the door frame. Thomas had taught her to shoot, had insisted she practice until she could hit a tin can at 30 yards. "The frontier doesn't forgive the unprepared," he'd said. And it sure as hell doesn't forgive women who can't protect themselves. She lifted the rifle, checked the load, then called out with more confidence than she felt. "Who are you? What do you want?" Silence. Then, "Name's Jonah. Jonah Greyhawk. Been traveling 3 days. Horse went lame 10 miles back. If you can't take me in, I understand. But if you've got a barn or a shed, I'd be grateful for any cover at all." There was something in his voice, not the predatory edge she'd been listening for, but genuine desperation, the kind of exhaustion that came from pushing past human limits, from facing down death and knowing you're losing. Clara pressed her forehead against the door, warring with herself. Every instinct screamed danger, but beneath that quieter was her mother's voice. "You never know what lost soul might need finding." "Step back from the door," she said finally. "I'm armed. I'm opening up, but you make one wrong move and I will shoot you, understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Clara drew back the bolt with shaking hands, then pulled the door inward. Wind exploded into the cabin, bringing snow and cold and the smell of ice. And there, illuminated by her small candle's glow, stood Jonah Greyhawk. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to fill the doorframe. Ice had crusted in his dark beard and frosted the wool of his coat. His hair, black as coal and hanging past his collar, was matted with snow. But it was his eyes that stopped her, eyes the color of storm clouds that looked at her with an exhaustion so profound it seemed to radiate from his bones. He swayed slightly, catching himself against the doorframe. "I won't hurt you," he said quietly. "I give you my word." Clara kept the rifle level, her finger resting near the trigger. "Your word doesn't mean much to me, stranger. I don't know you." "No, ma'am, you don't." He met her gaze steadily despite the way his body trembled from cold. "But I'm asking anyway. One night, I'll sleep by the door. I'll be gone at first light. You won't even know I was here." She should say no. Should send him to the barn, or better yet, turn him away entirely. But looking at him now, seeing the ice in his beard and the blue tinge to his lips, Clara knew with sudden certainty that another hour in this storm would kill him. And she'd had enough of death. "Get in here before we both freeze," she said, stepping back. "But the rifle stays loaded and I'm a light sleeper. You try anything, and it'll be the last mistake you make." Something that might have been relief crossed his face. "Thank you." He stumbled inside and Clara quickly shut the door against the wind. In the sudden stillness, she could hear his labored breathing, could see the way his hands shook as he tried to work the buttons of his coat with fingers too numb to cooperate. "Here." She propped the rifle against the wall, close enough to grab but not threatening, then moved to help him with the frozen fastenings. "You're half dead already. Get closer to the fire before you lose any toes." Jonah nodded, too exhausted for pride. He shuffled toward the hearth while Clara hung his coat on the peg by the door. The garment was well made but worn, the kind a man bought to last and then wore until it couldn't be mended anymore. His boots were the same, quality leather but aged, the soles showing hard miles. She turned to find him standing before the fire, hands extended toward the flames, his whole body shaking with shivers so violent she could hear his teeth chattering. Now that his coat was off, she could see he was leaner than his height suggested, built like someone who lived hard and ate when food was available. "Sit," Clara said, gesturing to the chair Thomas used to occupy. "I'll get you something hot." She moved to the stove, ladling stew into a bowl with hands that had steadied now that the immediate crisis had passed. Behind her, she heard the creak of the chair as Jonah lowered himself carefully, as if uncertain his legs would continue holding him. When she turned back, bowl in hand, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Gratitude, yes, but something else beneath it, something that looked almost like recognition. "Here." She thrust the bowl toward him, along with a spoon. "It's cold, but it's food." Jonah took it with both hands, his fingers still clumsy from the cold. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. Clara Whitmore." She paused, then added what needed saying. "I'm a widow, live here alone. So if you were thinking this was going to be easy pickings, you should know I've got nothing worth stealing and I really will shoot you if you give me cause." He looked up from the bowl, meeting her eyes directly. "I'm not here to steal from you, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm just trying not to freeze to death." There was no challenge in his voice, No attempt to charm or manipulate, just exhausted honesty. Clara found herself relaxing slightly, though she kept herself between him and the rifle. "Where were you headed?" she asked. Nobody travels these mountains in winter without good reason. Jonah was quiet for a moment, lifting the spoon to his mouth with careful concentration. He swallowed, and Clara saw something cross his face. Not just relief at the food, but genuine appreciation for the simple fact of warmth and sustenance. "North," he said finally, "toward the reservation lands near the Montana border. Got family there." "That's another 3 weeks of travel in good weather, maybe 2 months in this." Clara crossed her arms. "What could possibly be worth risking your life for?" He met her gaze again, and this time she saw something complicated in those storm-gray eyes. "A promise," he said quietly, "to someone who mattered." Clara recognized the weight in those words, the particular gravity that came from carrying dead men's wishes. She knew because she carried them too. All the things Thomas had wanted to do. All the plans they'd made that would never come to fruition. "Well," she said, her voice softer now, "you won't be keeping any promises if you're dead. Eat. Then you can sleep by the fire. But come morning, you're on your way." Jonah nodded, returning his attention to the stew. Clara watched him eat for a moment longer, then moved to gather blankets from the chest beneath the window. She could feel the awareness of him in her space, this stranger she'd led into her sanctuary. Part of her still screamed that this was foolish, dangerous, the kind of mistake that got frontier women killed. But another part, the part that had lit the candle, that still believed in mercy despite everything, felt something else entirely. She felt less alone. Clara woke before dawn to the sound of movement in the main room. Her hand went immediately to the pistol she'd placed under her pillow, another of Thomas's lessons, but she forced herself to pause, to listen. The sounds were domestic, the scrape of the poker against the hearth, the careful clink of the kettle being filled, the soft creak of floorboards as someone moved with deliberate quiet, trying not to wake her. She slipped from bed, pulled her robe over her nightgown, and eased open the bedroom door. Jonah Greyhawk knelt before the fire, coaxing it back to life with practiced efficiency. He'd shed his outer layer but still wore his shirt and trousers, and in the gray pre-dawn light filtering through the window, Claire could see he looked decidedly more human than he had last night. The ice was gone from his beard. Color had returned to his face. His movements, though still careful, no longer carried that desperate exhaustion. "You're supposed to be asleep," Clara said from the doorway. He looked up quickly, then rose to his feet with surprising grace for a man his size. "Didn't mean to wake you, was just trying to get the fire going before I left." "Storm's still blowing." Clara moved past him to peer out the window. Snow continued to fall in thick curtains, obscuring everything beyond 30 feet. "You go out in that, you'll be dead before you make it a mile." Jonah followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. "Can't impose on your hospitality any longer than I already have." "It's not hospitality if you die of stubbornness." Clara turned from the window, studying him in the growing light. He was younger than she'd thought last night, maybe 30, though hard living had carved lines around his eyes and mouth. Native blood showed clearly in his features, high cheekbones, bronze skin, that coal-black hair. But his eyes were gray, speaking to mixed heritage, to belonging fully to neither world. She recognized that particular kind of displacement. She'd seen it in Thomas too, though his had come from different sources. A poor Irish immigrant trying to make a life in a land that viewed him as lesser, as disposable. "I've got venison that needs cooking," she heard herself say. "And the woodpile could use restocking before the next storm hits. You want to pay for another night's shelter? You can make yourself useful." Jonah studied her for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this was genuine or some kind of test. "You sure? I don't want to make you uncomfortable." "I'm not comfortable either way." Clara crossed her arms. "But I'm practical. Storm like this could last another day or two. You're not leaving until it breaks, so you might as well be useful instead of just another mouth to feed." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yes, ma'am. I can do that." "Clara." The word came out before she'd thought it through. "You keep calling me ma'am like I'm some old woman. It's Clara." "Clara," he repeated, and something about the way he said her name, careful, respectful, as if it were something precious, made her stomach flutter strangely. She turned away quickly, moving toward the kitchen area. "There's coffee in the pot from yesterday. I'll make fresh." You know how to fry venison without burning it? I do. Then get to it. I'll handle the rest. They worked in silence, moving around each other with the careful choreography of strangers sharing close quarters. Clara found herself hyper-aware of his presence, the way he moved with quiet competence, the breadth of his shoulders as he bent over the stove, the surprising gentleness in his hands as he handled the cast-iron skillet. When had she last cooked with someone? When had she last heard footsteps that weren't her own? 4 months of silence had made her forget how loud another person could be, even when they weren't making a sound. "You been alone here long?" Jonah asked, not looking up from the venison he was turning in the pan. Clara stiffened. "That's not really your business." "No, ma'am, Clara. It's not." He paused. "But living alone in country like this, that's hard for anyone. Dangerous for a woman on her own." "I manage." "Didn't say you couldn't." He transferred the meat to a plate, then finally looked at her. "Just meant it must be lonely." The word hit harder than it should have. Lonely. Such a simple thing, but it carried the weight of every silent meal, every empty bed, every conversation she'd had with herself because there was no one else to talk to. "My husband died," she said abruptly. 4 months ago. So yes, it's lonely, but it's also safe. And after what this territory took from me, safe is what matters." Jonah's expression shifted. Understanding, recognition, something that looked like shared pain. "I'm sorry, truly." "Don't be. You didn't know him." Clara took the plate he offered, their fingers brushing briefly. She pulled back as if burned. "Let's eat before it gets cold." They sat at the small table, the same one where Clara had eaten alone for months. Having someone across from her felt surreal, like stepping into a memory of how things used to be. Except Jonah wasn't Thomas. Couldn't be further from Thomas if he tried. "This is good," Jonah said after the first bite. "Really good." Clara shrugged. "It's just meat and salt." "It's more than that." He met her eyes. "It's the first real meal I've had in a week, so thank you." She didn't know what to say to that, so she focused on her own plate. They ate in silence for a while. The only sounds, the scrape of forks and the howl of wind outside. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was companionable, easy in a way Clara hadn't expected. "The woodpile," she said finally. "It's around back, under the overhang. You'll need to split what's there and stack it properly. Think you can handle that?" Jonah smiled. A real smile this time, one that softened the hard lines of his face. "I think I can manage." "Good." Clara stood, gathering the plates. "Because if you're staying another night, you're earning your keep." He rose too, and for a moment they stood close enough that Clara could smell the wood smoke on his clothes, could see the flecks of gold hidden in those gray eyes. "Clara?" he said quietly. "What?" "Thank you for not turning me away last night, for the second chance this morning." He paused. "I know it wasn't easy. Letting a stranger into your home." She swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in her throat. "Well, don't make me regret it." "I won't." And somehow looking at him in the pale morning light with snow falling beyond the window and the fire warm at their backs, Clara found herself believing him. The storm raged for 3 more days. 3 days in which Jonah Greyhawk transformed from stranger to something else, not quite guest, not quite friend, something Clara didn't have words for yet. He was useful. She had to give him that. The woodpile was split and stacked properly for the first time since Thomas died. The loose shutter that had been banging in every wind got fixed. The leak in the corner of the bedroom, the one Clara had been catching in a bucket all winter, was patched and sealed. But it was the small things that unsettled her more. The way he poured her coffee in the morning without being asked, remembering already that she took it black. The way he gave her space when she needed it, seeming to sense her moods without her having to explain. The way he listened when she talked, really listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak. On the 3rd day, Clara found him in the barn, brushing down the mule she kept for heavy hauling. She'd come out to check on the animals and found him there, humming something low and melodic as he worked the brush through the mule's winter coat. "You don't have to do that," she said from the doorway. Jonah looked up, his hands stilling. "I know, but Silas here was looking a bit ragged. Figured he'd appreciate the attention." "Silas?" "That's what the name on his stall says." He gestured to the carved board above the mule's head, where Thomas had burned letters into the wood years ago. Good strong name for a good strong mule. Clara moved closer, running her hand along Silas's neck. My husband named him. Said every creature deserves the dignity of a name, even the ones we work. Smart man, your husband. He was. Clara was quiet for a moment. He was also reckless, joined up with the territorial militia because he thought it was his duty, thought he could make a difference, help settle the border disputes peacefully. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Got himself killed in some nameless skirmish that didn't change a damn thing. Jonah set down the brush carefully. That's hard. Losing someone to something meaningless. All death is meaningless out here. Clara met his eyes. This land doesn't care about our reasons or our righteousness. It just takes. Maybe. Jonah leaned against the stall, his expression thoughtful. Or maybe it gives too, just differently than we expect. That's naive. Maybe. He smiled slightly. But I've seen enough darkness to appreciate the light when it shows up, even if it's just for a little while. Clara didn't know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject. Storm's breaking. You'll be able to leave tomorrow if you want. Was something flickered in his expression? Was that disappointment? I'll be out of your hair then. I didn't say... Clara stopped herself. What was she doing? This man had been here 3 days. 3 days out of her whole life. She couldn't start depending on his presence, couldn't start hoping he might stay. That way led to more loss, more grief. I should get back to the house, she said abruptly. Check on dinner. She turned to go, but Jonah's voice stopped her. Clara, can I ask you something? What? That candle, the one you keep in the window every night. What's it for? Clara's hand tightened on the barn door. Old tradition? My mother taught me. Light in the window on dark nights, in case someone needs finding. Did you need someone to find you? He asked quietly. Is that why you kept burning it? The question cut too close to truths Clara hadn't admitted even to herself. Had she been hoping? Had some part of her been calling out for rescue, for companionship, for anything to break the terrible monotony of grief? I don't know, she whispered. Then, stronger. Does it matter? Jonah moved toward her, stopping just close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. Yeah. I think maybe it does. For a moment, they stood there in the dim barn with snow falling beyond the door and the warm smell of hay around them. Clara felt something shift in her chest, some wall she'd built starting to crack. Then Silas snorted and stamped, breaking the spell. Clara stepped back quickly. Dinner. Dinner. She fled before Jonah could respond, her heart hammering as she crossed the snow-covered yard. What was wrong with her? She barely knew this man. And yet something about him made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Not since Thomas. Maybe not even with Thomas, who had loved her but never quite understood the depths of her loneliness, her yearning for something more than survival. That night, they ate in near silence. But it was a different kind of silence now, charged, aware, full of things neither of them was saying. After dinner, Jonah helped her wash the dishes. Their hands brushed in the soapy water, and neither pulled away quickly. Tell me about your family, Clara said, desperate to fill the quiet with something safe. The ones you're traveling to see. Jonah was quiet for a long moment, his hands stilling in the water. My mother's people, Cheyenne, up near the Tongue River. Haven't seen them in close to 8 years. That's a long time. It is. He pulled his hands from the water, drying them on the towel. I've been other places, doing other things. But it's time to go home. Time to honor some promises I made. There was that word again, promises. Claire was learning that Jonah took his promises seriously, carried them like weighted stones he refused to put down. Must be important, she said. Those promises. They are. He looked at her then, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Sometimes the most important things are the hardest to do, but that doesn't make them less necessary. Clara didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to explain that she understood, that she'd been living with Thomas's unfinished dreams for months, carrying his abandoned plans like ghosts. Instead, she moved to the window, to the small candle still burning there. Beyond it, the snow had finally stopped. Stars were beginning to emerge through breaking clouds, brittle and bright in the winter sky. "Storm's done," she said quietly. "You'll have clear traveling tomorrow." Jonah came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Clara, don't." She cut him off, not looking at him. "Don't say whatever you're about to say. You'll leave tomorrow like you planned. I'll go back to managing on my own. That's how it has to be." "Why?" The simple question made her angry. "Because I can't do this again. Can't let someone matter and then watch them leave. Can't—" Her voice broke. Jonah's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers warm and calloused and solid. "I'm not leaving because I want to, Clara. I'm leaving because I have to. But that doesn't mean these days didn't matter." "They can't matter." Clara pulled her hand free, wrapping her arms around herself. "If they matter, then losing you will hurt. And I've had enough hurt to last a lifetime." She felt rather than saw him step back, giving her space. "I understand, and I'm sorry." Clara closed her eyes against the burn of tears. "Don't be sorry. Just go tomorrow, and don't look back." "Clara, please, Jonah. Please just let this be enough." The silence stretched between them, heavy with all the things they wouldn't say. Finally, Jonah moved away, back toward his bedroll by the fire. "Good night, Clara," he said softly. She didn't answer, just stood at the window, watching the stars emerge and wondering why doing the right thing felt so much like making a terrible mistake. But morning brought clarity of a different kind. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, to the sound of Jonah moving quietly through her kitchen, to the realization that he was still here and she had one more day, one more morning, before lonely became her only companion again. She dressed quickly, braided her hair with shaking hands, and emerged to find him setting the table for two. "Thought you'd want a proper breakfast before I left," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Seemed only fair after everything you've done." Clara's throat tightened. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." They ate in silence, both of them too aware that this was an ending. When the meal was finished, Jonah stood and began gathering his few belongings. The coat Clara had mended, the hat she'd dried by the fire, the small pack that held whatever else he owned in this world. Clara watched him prepare to leave and felt something crack open in her chest. This was wrong. She knew it with a certainty that defied logic or self-preservation. Letting him walk out that door was wrong. But before she could find the words to stop him, Jonah turned to her one last time. "Clara, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have said from the beginning." And in his storm-gray eyes, she saw secrets rising like ghosts, truths that would change everything. "What?" she whispered, not sure she wanted to know. Jonah drew a deep breath, his hand moving to his pack. From it, he drew a worn envelope, the paper soft with age and handling. "I didn't come to your door by accident," he said quietly. "I came because of a promise to a man named Thomas Hale." The world tilted. Clara's vision blurred at the edges. "What did you say?" "Thomas Hale was my friend, Clara. More than a friend. He was the best man I ever knew. And before he died, he made me swear I'd find you." "Made me swear I'd make sure you were safe." Clara's legs gave out. She sat hard in the chair, staring at the envelope in Jonah's hand as if it were a snake. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Thomas never mentioned anyone named Jonah, never said he knew me by another name back then. Before I left the army. Before I tried to disappear into places where my mixed blood wouldn't matter quite so much." Jonah moved closer, his expression anguished. "Clara, please, let me explain." But Clara couldn't hear him over the roaring in her ears. Everything, the warmth, the companionship, the fragile hope she'd been trying so hard not to feel, all of it had been built on lies. He hadn't come to her door by chance, hadn't stayed because he wanted to. He'd stayed because Thomas had asked him to. Every kindness had been an obligation, every smile a duty. "Get out," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Clara, get out!" The scream tore from her throat, raw and broken. "Get out of my house!" Jonah flinched as if she'd struck him. "Please, let me explain. The promise, it started as duty. But Clara, what I feel for you now, lies." She was on her feet now, shaking with rage and grief. "Everything you've said, everything you've done, it was all lies. You pitied me, the poor widow that needed protecting. The responsibility your dead friend saddled you with. That's not true, Clara. If you just listen. But she was past listening. 4 months of carefully controlled grief exploded outward, finding a target in this man who had made her hope, made her feel, made her believe that maybe loneliness didn't have to be forever. I want you gone, she said, her voice cold now, deadly. Take your promises and your pity and your lies and leave. And don't you dare come back. Jonah stood frozen, the envelope still clutched in his hand. Clara could see the moment he understood that nothing he said would change her mind, could see him close himself off, retreating behind walls of his own. All right, he said quietly. I'll go. But Clara, he set the envelope on the table between them. This is for you, from Thomas. He wanted you to have it. Whatever you think of me, please read it. Then he gathered his things and walked out the door without looking back. Clara stood alone in the sudden silence, staring at the envelope with her dead husband's handwriting on the front. And for the first time since Thomas died, she let herself break completely. The candle in the window had gone out. The envelope sat on the table for 3 days before Clara could bring herself to touch it. 3 days in which she moved through the cabin like a ghost, performing the rituals of survival without thought or feeling. She fed the animals. She kept the fire burning. She ate just enough to keep her body functioning, though everything tasted like ash. The silence was different now. Before Jonah, it had been heavy but familiar, a weight she'd learned to carry. Now it pressed against her like a living thing, full of echoes. His footsteps on the porch, his voice asking how she took her coffee, the warm rumble of his laugh when she'd said something that surprised him. She'd been lonely before, but she hadn't known the specific shape of his absence, the particular emptiness left by Jonah Greyhawk. On the 4th morning, Clara woke to find fresh snow covering the tracks he'd left when he walked away, as if the mountain itself wanted to erase any evidence he'd been there at all. She stood at the window, the same place she'd stood when she told him to leave, and stared at the white expanse until her eyes burned. Then, finally, she turned to face the envelope. Her hand shook as she picked it up. Thomas's handwriting stared back at her, strong, slanted letters spelling out her name. She'd know that script anywhere, had traced it on the few letters he'd sent from the border, memorizing every curve and line as if she could hold on to him through ink and paper alone. Clara broke the seal with trembling fingers and unfolded the pages inside. The paper crackled softly, impossibly loud in the silent cabin. She recognized the date at the top, written just days before Thomas died, though she hadn't known then that she was counting down to the last time she'd ever hear from him. My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Jonah has kept his word. I'm writing this in case the worst happens, though I pray you'll never need to see it. But the fighting's getting worse, and I need to know you'll be taken care of if I don't make it home. First, I need you to understand about Jonah. His real name is Jonah Greyhawk, though when I knew him in the army, he went by John Gray, tried to hide his Cheyenne blood behind a name that sounded white enough to avoid trouble. He was the finest soldier I ever served with, and the truest friend I've ever known. He saved my life twice, Clara. Once from a Comanche arrow that would have taken me in the throat, and once from my own stupidity when I nearly started a fight I couldn't win. When I told him about you, about the woman waiting for me back in the mountains who made every day of this hell worth surviving, he listened like what I said mattered, asked about you, remembered details, made me believe that maybe I'd actually make it home to you after all. But things have changed here. The violence is spreading, and I'm not sure any of us are getting out. So I asked Jonah for something I had no right to ask. I made him promise that if I died, he'd find you, make sure you were safe, help you if you needed it. He didn't want to agree, said it wasn't his place, that you'd want to grieve in peace. But I begged him, Clara. I got down on my knees in front of him and every other man in our unit and begged him to promise. Because the thought of you alone in that cabin, struggling through winter without help, without knowing how much I loved you, I couldn't bear it, so he promised. And Jonah Greyhawk doesn't break his promises. Clara's hands tightened on the paper, crumpling the edges. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to keep reading. I know what you're thinking, that I had no right to burden a stranger with responsibility for you, that you're strong enough to survive alone. And you are, my darling. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. But strength doesn't mean you have to carry everything by yourself. If Jonah came to you, it's because he kept his word even when it cost him, even when it pulled him away from wherever he was trying to go. He's a good man, Clara, a better man than me in a lot of ways. He's known loss, lost his whole family when he was young, lost his place in both the white world and his mother's people. He understands what it means to be alone in ways I never could. I'm not asking you to marry him or fall in love with him or anything foolish like that. I'm just asking you to let him help. To not push him away because accepting help feels like weakness. Because it's not. It's wisdom. And Clara, if something more did happen between you, if in the years after I'm gone you found comfort in his company, I wouldn't haunt you for it. I'd be grateful. Grateful that you weren't alone. Grateful that someone I trusted was taking care of the woman I love more than my own life. The words swam before Clara's eyes. She had to stop, pressing her fist against her mouth to keep from making a sound. Thomas had known, had planned for this, had given Jonah permission to care for her, maybe even to… No, she couldn't think about that, couldn't process what it meant that her dead husband had practically given his blessing for her to find someone new. I love you, Clara Whitmore. I love your stubbornness and your fierce independence and the way you refuse to let this hard land break you. I love your kindness, the way you leave candles burning for lost souls even when you're the one who's lost. I love the sound of your laugh and the way you hum when you think no one's listening and the fierce way you love when you finally let yourself. I'm sorry I won't be there to grow old with you. Sorry I won't see your hair go silver or your hands grow weathered from the years. Sorry I won't be there to help you through the hard times that are coming. But I'm not sorry I married you. I'm not sorry for any minute we had together, even though they led to this. You were worth every moment, Clara. You made my short life worth living. Don't spend the rest of yours alone because you're afraid to let anyone else in. Don't let grief become your only companion. Live, my darling. Please. For both of us. Forever yours. Thomas. Clara read the letter 3 times before her hands finally stopped shaking enough to set it down. Then she walked to the bedroom, closed the door, and screamed into her pillow until her throat was raw and her voice was gone. Thomas had orchestrated this, had sent Jonah to her like some kind of guardian angel, had essentially given them his blessing, had tried to manage her grief from beyond the grave because he couldn't bear the thought of her being alone. And she'd sent Jonah away, had screamed at him, called him a liar, thrown his kindness back in his face without even giving him a chance to explain. The worst part was that he'd been right. She'd been furious not because Jonah had come out of obligation, but because learning the truth had given her permission to push him away, had given her an excuse to protect herself from the terrifying possibility that she might actually care about him, that she might already care about him. Clara lay in bed as the winter sun tracked across the ceiling, Thomas's letter clutched against her chest. She thought about the way Jonah had listened when she talked, the way he'd fixed things without being asked, the way he'd looked at her in the barn like she was someone worth knowing, not just a duty to be discharged. She thought about his hands on hers in the dishwater, his voice saying her name like it mattered, the careful way he'd given her space when she needed it, and company when the silence got too heavy. She thought about the fact that he'd traveled through a deadly storm to keep a promise to a dead friend, that he'd spent days helping a widow who'd given him nothing but suspicion and eventually rage, that he'd tried to tell her the truth, and she'd refused to listen. And she thought about the last thing he'd said before he left, the promise. It started as duty, but Clara, what I feel for you now, what did he feel? Had those days meant something to him too, or had she just been another responsibility, another burden to carry until he could move on to his real life? Clara didn't know. But as the sun set and darkness crept into the cabin, she realized with sudden, painful clarity that she'd thrown away her only chance to find out. A week passed, then 2. Clara moved through the days with mechanical efficiency, but her mind was elsewhere, following a trail north toward the Montana border, wondering if Jonah had made it safely, if he thought about her at all, if he hated her for the things she'd said. She read Thomas's letter so many times the paper grew soft at the creases. Each reading brought new understanding, new grief. Thomas had known her so well, had known she'd push help away, had known she'd use independence as armor against the pain of connection, had known she'd need permission to live again. Old Samuel Pritchard made his way up the mountain on the first clear day of March, bringing supplies and news from Hollow Creek. He found Clara in the barn, mucking out Silas's stall with grim determination. "Mrs. Whitmore!" he called from the doorway, his weathered face creasing with concern. "You all right up here? Hasn't been anyone checking on you all winter?" Clara straightened, pushing hair out of her face with the back of her hand. "I'm fine, Samuel, managing just fine." "You look thin." He moved closer, studying her with sharp eyes. "And there's tracks around the cabin that ain't yours. Someone been here?" Clara's hands tightened on the pitchfork. "Traveler. Needed shelter from a storm back in December. Stayed a few days, then moved on." "Uh-huh." Samuel's expression suggested he didn't believe the casual dismissal. "This traveler have a name?" "Jonah Greyhawk. Said he was heading north to the reservation lands." Clara forced herself to meet Samuel's gaze. "You hear of anyone by that name?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Greyhawk, that's a Cheyenne name. Had a half-breed scout in my unit during the Indian Wars, went by something similar. Good man. Saved more lives than he took, which is saying something for those times." "Your unit?" Clara blinked. "I didn't know you served." "Don't talk about it much. Nothing to be proud of, what we did to those people." Samuel leaned against the stall, his face distant with memory. "But this Greyhawk, he was different. Tried to bridge both worlds, keep the peace when he could. Last I heard, he'd disappeared. Some said he went back to his mother's people. Others said he'd been killed." Clara's chest tightened. "When was this?" 8, maybe 9 years back." Samuel's eyes sharpened on her face. "Why? This traveler of yours caused trouble?" "No, the opposite." Clara set down the pitchfork, her hands trembling. "He was kind, helpful. I don't think I properly appreciated it at the time." "Appreciated what?" "His company." The admission came out smaller than she'd intended. "The fact that for a few days, I wasn't alone." Understanding dawned in Samuel's expression. "Ah, that way is it?" "I don't know what way it is. I sent him away before I could figure it out." Clara wrapped her arms around herself. "My husband knew him, served with him, asked him to check on me if anything happened. So Jonah came out of obligation, not—" She stopped, unable to finish. "Not what? Not because he wanted to?" Samuel shook his head. "Mrs. Whitmore, a man doesn't travel through the worst winter this territory's seen in 20 years just to discharge an obligation. He could have sent word, could have asked someone else to check on you, could have done 100 things that didn't involve nearly freezing to death on your doorstep. He promised my husband, and he kept that promise by showing up. What he did after, staying, helping, whatever else happened between you, that was his choice." Samuel moved toward the barn door, then paused. "Question is, what are you going to choose now?" Clara stared at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you can stay here feeling sorry for yourself, wondering what might have been, or you can do something about it." He gestured toward the white expanse beyond the barn. "Spring's coming. Snow will be melting soon. Trails will open up. Man heading to the northern reservations would likely pass through Fort Benson. That's maybe 3 weeks hard travel from here." "Samuel, I can't just—" "Can't what? Can't go after something you want? Can't take a risk?" The old man's voice gentled. "Mrs. Whitmore, I knew your Thomas. Good man, but reckless. Always charging into things without thinking them through. You balanced that in him, made him steadier." He paused. "But now you're out of balance yourself. All caution, no courage. That's not living, that's just surviving, and Thomas wouldn't have wanted that for you." Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. "What if I go and he doesn't want me? What if it was just duty after all?" "Then you'll know. And knowing is better than spending the rest of your life wondering." Samuel tipped his hat. "I'll be back in a month with more supplies. If you're not here, I'll understand." He left Clara standing in the barn, his words echoing in the silence. 3 weeks to Fort Benson. 3 weeks of hard travel through country that could kill her if she wasn't careful. 3 weeks to find a man who might not want to be found, might not want to see her, might have already moved on to whatever life he was trying to build. It was foolish, dangerous, exactly the kind of impulsive decision she'd always counseled Thomas against. Clara looked around the barn, at Silas in his stall, at the neatly stacked hay Jonah had organized, at the repaired tack hanging on hooks he'd installed. Evidence of his presence was everywhere. Small kindnesses that hadn't been obligations at all but choices. Care given freely, even when she'd offered nothing in return but suspicion. She thought about the way he'd said her name, the way he'd looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, the way he'd tried to tell her the truth and she'd refused to listen. "Don't spend the rest of yours alone because you're afraid to let anyone else in," Thomas had written. Clara pressed her hand to the letter she now kept folded in her pocket, feeling the soft paper beneath her palm. Then she straightened her shoulders and walked back to the cabin with purpose in her stride. She had planning to do. The preparations took 4 days. Clara packed carefully: dried venison, hardtack, coffee, ammunition for the rifle. She chose her warmest clothes, her sturdiest boots. She wrote a letter to Samuel explaining where she'd gone and asking him to watch the cabin while she was away. On the 5th morning, she loaded her supplies onto Silas's back and stood in the cabin one last time. The place she'd shared with Thomas. The place where she'd learned to be alone. The place where Jonah Greyhawk had stumbled into her life and changed everything without meaning to. She picked up the candle from the window, the same one that had guided him to her door, and tucked it carefully into her pack. Then she locked the cabin, mounted Silas, and turned north toward Fort Benson. Toward answers. Toward risk. Toward whatever came next. The journey was harder than she'd anticipated. The trails were muddy with snowmelt, treacherous with ice in the shadows. Twice she had to backtrack when the path became impassable. Once she nearly lost Silas when he spooked at a bear emerging from hibernation. But Clara pushed forward, driven by something she couldn't quite name. Not just hope. Hope was too fragile, too easily broken. This was deeper than hope. This was need. She needed to know if what she'd felt was real. Needed to know if Jonah had felt it too. Needed to tell him she was sorry, that she'd been wrong, that she understood now what he'd tried to give her, and she'd thrown away. 2 weeks into the journey, Clara reached the trading post at Copper Creek. It was a rough collection of buildings huddled against the mountain, serving travelers and trappers heading to and from the Northern Territories. She stabled Silas and made her way into the main hall, where a handful of weathered men sat drinking and playing cards. The conversation died when she entered. A woman alone was unusual enough to draw attention, especially one who looked like she'd been traveling hard. "Help you, miss?" The man behind the makeshift bar was missing 2 fingers on his left hand and had a scar running from temple to jaw. "I'm looking for someone," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. "A man named Jonah Greyhawk, half Cheyenne, tall, dark hair. Would have passed through here maybe 6 weeks back, heading north." The barkeep's expression shifted. Not quite recognition, but something close. "What's your business with Greyhawk?" "That's between him and me." Uh-huh. He studied her for a long moment. "You know what he is? What he did?" Clara's pulse quickened. "I know he kept a promise to a dead friend. I know he helped me when he didn't have to. That's all I need to know." One of the card players, a grizzled trapper with a beard down to his chest, spoke up. "Greyhawk came through here about 5 weeks back, stayed one night, said he was heading to the camps near the Tongue River." "How far is that from here?" "Weeks' travel if the weather holds. But miss, you don't want to go up there alone. That's reservation land. Government's been pushing the tribes further out, and tensions are running high. A white woman wandering into that situation—" "I'll manage," Clara interrupted. "Can you draw me a map?" The trapper and the barkeep exchanged glances. Then the trapper shrugged and pulled out a stub of pencil and a scrap of paper. "Your funeral. Follow the North Fork of Copper Creek until it splits. Take the eastern branch toward the pine forests. You'll see smoke from the camps before you see the camps themselves. And miss, when you get there, you mention Greyhawk's name right away. Otherwise, they're liable to shoot first and ask questions later." Clara took the map with hands that wanted to shake. She was close now, so close. "Thank you." She spent that night in the trading post's crude boarding room, lying awake and staring at the ceiling. What would she say when she found him? What if he'd already settled in with his mother's people, already moved on, already forgotten the widow in the mountains who'd screamed at him and sent him away? What if she was making a fool of herself? But Thomas's words kept echoing in her mind. "Don't spend the rest of yours alone because you're afraid to let anyone else in." The next morning, Clara set out again. The map proved accurate. She followed the creek north, watching the landscape change from rocky mountains to rolling foothills to dense pine forests that seemed to swallow the sky. The air grew colder here, sharper, carrying scents of smoke and leather and something wild she couldn't name. On the seventh day after leaving Copper Creek, Clara saw the smoke. It rose in thin columns from a valley ahead, dozens of fires sending their messages skyward. As she drew closer, she could make out structures. Traditional lodges mixed with rougher shelters. A whole community carved out of the wilderness in defiance of the forces trying to push them further into nothing. Clara's heart hammered as she guided Silas down the slope toward the camp. She was acutely aware of being watched, could feel eyes tracking her progress even though she couldn't see anyone. The rifle across her saddle suddenly felt more like provocation than protection. She was still 50 yards from the first lodge when a man stepped out to block her path. He was young, maybe 20, with long black hair and eyes that held no welcome at all. "You're lost," he said in English, accented with something older. "Turn back." Clara swallowed her fear. "I'm looking for Jonah Greyhawk. I was told he came here." The young man's expression didn't change. "Why? That's between him and me." "Not good enough." He moved his hand to the knife at his belt. "We don't need white women bringing trouble here." "I'm not bringing trouble. I just need to talk to him." Clara kept her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Please, tell him Clara Whitmore is here. Tell him—" Her voice cracked. "Tell him I read the letter, and I'm sorry." The young man studied her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared into the camp. Clara waited, every second stretching into eternity. Silas shifted beneath her, sensing her tension. Around them, the camp had gone quiet. No voices, no movement, just the crackle of fires and the whisper of wind through pines. Then she saw him. Jonah emerged from between two lodges, moving with that same quiet grace she remembered. But he looked different here, more settled somehow, more himself. His hair was tied back and he wore different clothes, a mix of traditional leather and frontier practicality that spoke to both his heritages. He stopped when he saw her, his expression unreadable. Clara dismounted on shaking legs, holding Silas's reins like a lifeline. They stared at each other across 30 feet of cold ground, and Clara couldn't read anything in his face. Not welcome, not anger, nothing. "Clara." Her name was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I read the letter," she said, her voice carrying in the silence. "Thomas's letter, the one you tried to give me." Jonah's jaw tightened. And I was wrong." The words tumbled out, desperate and raw. "I was wrong about everything. You weren't lying to me, Jonah. You were trying to keep a promise while dealing with—" She stopped, searching for the right words. "While dealing with something neither of us expected." He didn't move, didn't react. "What are you asking me, Clara?" "I'm asking—" Her voice broke. She forced herself to continue. "I'm asking what you meant, that last day. You said the promise started as duty, but what you felt, you didn't finish. And I need to know. I need to know if you felt what I felt. If those days mattered to you the way they mattered to me." Jonah took a step forward, then stopped as if fighting himself. "Why? Why do you need to know?" "Because I've spent 8 weeks wondering, because I can't sleep without hearing your voice. Because every morning I wake up, and the cabin feels wrong without you in it." Clara's hands twisted in Silas's reins. "Because I think I might be falling in love with you, and I need to know if I'm the only one." The silence that followed felt endless. Clara watched emotions chase across Jonah's face, shock, hope, something that looked like pain. Then he closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. "You're not the only one," he said, his voice rough. "Clara, you were never the only one." His hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle, despite the intensity in his eyes. "I came to your door because of a promise. I stayed because I couldn't make myself leave. Every day I told myself tomorrow I'd go, and every day I found another reason to stay just a little longer. Because you made me laugh. Because you challenged me. Because being near you felt like coming home after years of wandering." Clara's breath caught. "Then why didn't you say something?" "Because you were grieving. Because you'd just lost your husband. Because I had no right to feel what I was feeling." His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. "And because I was terrified that if you knew the truth, you'd send me away." "I did send you away." You did. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. And I deserved it. I should have told you from the beginning. Should have given you the choice instead of letting you think. Clara stopped him by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss lasted only a heartbeat before Clara pulled back, suddenly aware of the dozens of eyes watching them from the camp. Heat flooded her cheeks, but Jonah's hands remained gentle on her face, his thumbs still tracing small circles against her skin as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. I traveled 3 weeks to find you, she whispered. I'm not going to waste time being careful about what I say or how I feel. A slow smile spread across Jonah's face, transforming the hard lines into something almost boyish. 3 weeks? Through mud and ice and one very angry bear. Clara found herself smiling back despite her embarrassment. Samuel Pritchard told me I was being foolish, that you might not want to see me, that I was risking my life for something that might not even exist. And what did you tell him? That knowing was better than wondering. She placed her hand over his heart, feeling it thunder beneath her palm. Was I wrong? Instead of answering, Jonah bent his head and kissed her again, deeper this time, his arms wrapping around her waist to pull her close. Clara melted into him, into the solid warmth of his body, and the rightness of being held after so long alone. The world narrowed to this. His mouth on hers, his hands in her hair, the way he held her like she was something precious he'd feared he'd never touch again. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara became aware of quiet laughter rippling through the watching crowd. She buried her face against Jonah's chest, mortified, but his chuckle vibrated against her cheek. I think you just scandalized my entire family, he murmured into her hair. Clara lifted her head. Your family? My mother's people. Jonah turned slightly, keeping one arm around her waist as he gestured to the camp. The Northern Cheyenne, or what's left of us after the government decided we were taking up too much space. The young man who'd first challenged Clara emerged from the watching crowd, his earlier hostility replaced with something that might have been amusement. So this is the woman who made you useless for a month, the one you wouldn't shut up about. But Jonah's expression turned long-suffering. Clara, this is my cousin Swift Eagle. He has no sense of timing or propriety. I have perfect timing, Swift Eagle grinned at Clara. You rode 3 weeks through hostile country to find him? Either you're very brave or very foolish. Both, Clara admitted. Probably more foolish than brave. Good. Swift Eagle's grin widened. You'll fit right in. Come. My mother will want to meet the woman who finally got through Jonah's thick skull. Before Clara could protest, she found herself being ushered deeper into the camp, Jonah's hand firm around hers and Silas being led away by a young boy who'd appeared from nowhere. The lodges rose around them, traditional structures that spoke to centuries of knowledge, alongside rougher shelters built from whatever materials could be salvaged or traded. Smoke from cookfires carried the scent of roasting meat and something sharp and herbal she didn't recognize. People emerged from their homes as they passed, women pausing in their work, children staring with wide eyes, men nodding acknowledgement to Jonah while studying Clara with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed suspicion. She kept her spine straight, meeting their gazes without challenge but without apology either. She was here. She wasn't leaving. They could accept that or not. Swift Eagle led them to a larger lodge near the camp's center. Before they reached it, an older woman stepped out, wiping her hands on a leather apron. She had the same high cheekbones as Jonah, the same storm-gray eyes, though hers were framed with deep lines that spoke to years of hardship and hard-won wisdom. So, she said in English that carried only the barest trace of accent, you brought her here. Jonah's hand tightened around Clara's. Mother, this is Clara Whitmore. Clara, this is my mother, Morning Star. Morning Star studied Clara with an intensity that made her want to squirm. Then, without warning, she stepped forward and placed both hands on Clara's shoulders. Her grip was strong, her gaze searching. You're the widow, Morning Star said. It wasn't a question. Yes. The one my son traveled through winter to find. The one who sent him away broken. Clara swallowed hard. Yes. Morning Star's expression didn't change. Why did you send him away? The question hung in the cold air. Clara could feel Jonah tense beside her, could sense Swift Eagle and the gathering crowd waiting for her answer. She could lie. Could matter meant risking more loss, and I'd matter meant risking more loss, and I'd already lost too much, because it was easier to be angry than to be vulnerable. And now I'm here, which means I've decided being vulnerable is worth the risk. Clara met Morningstar's gaze steadily. I hurt your son. I know that. I can't promise I won't hurt him again. I'm human. I'll make mistakes, but I can promise I'll try. I'll try to be worthy of whatever this is between us. The silence stretched. Then Morningstar's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't hostile either. At least you're honest. She released Clara's shoulders and stepped back. Come inside. We'll eat. We'll talk. And I'll decide if you're strong enough for my son. Mother, Jonah started, but Morningstar waved him off. Hush. This is women's business now. She turned and disappeared into the lodge. Swift Eagle clapped Jonah on the shoulder. Good luck, cousin. You're going to need it. Then he too vanished, leaving Clara and Jonah standing alone in the fading afternoon light. I should warn you, Jonah said, his voice carefully neutral. My mother doesn't approve of anything easily. She's going to ask you hard questions. She's going to test you. I know. Clara squeezed his hand. I traveled 3 weeks to get here, Jonah. I'm not going to run now just because your mother wants to make sure I'm not going to break your heart again. What if she decides you're not good enough? Clara turned to face him fully, rising on her toes so their eyes were level. Then I'll spend however long it takes proving her wrong, because I didn't come all this way to give up at the first challenge. Something fierce and tender blazed in Jonah's expression. He bent and kissed her forehead, lingering there. I don't deserve you. Probably not. Clara smiled against his skin. But you're stuck with me anyway. Inside the lodge, Morningstar had already set out wooden bowls and was ladling something that smelled of sage and venison from a pot hung over the central fire. She gestured for Clara to sit on one of the fur-covered platforms that ringed the space. You know how to work? Morningstar asked without preamble. Clara blinked at the abrupt question. Yes, I can cook, clean, mend, tend animals. I managed a homestead alone for 4 months after my husband died. What about children? You have any? No, Thomas and I, we wanted them, but there wasn't time. Morningstar grunted, handing Clara a bowl. And now? You want children with my son? Heat flooded Clara's face. We've barely... She stopped, gathering herself. I don't know. We haven't talked about it. Why not? You're both adults. You kiss each other in front of the whole camp like you're already married. Seems like something you should discuss. Clara shot a desperate look at Jonah, who'd settled beside her with an expression that suggested he was enjoying her discomfort far too much. He shrugged, offering no help. I suppose, Clara said carefully, if things between us develop, then children would be something I'd want. But that's a conversation for Jonah and me to have. Not, with all respect, something I need to defend to you before we've even figured out what we are to each other. Morningstar's eyes gleamed with something that might have been approval. Good. You have spine. Too many white women come here all soft and weepy, expecting to be taken care of. They don't last one winter. I'm not soft. Clara met the older woman's gaze. And I don't expect to be taken care of. I expect to be a partner, an equal, someone who contributes as much as she takes. Morningstar took a bite of her stew, chewing thoughtfully. Your husband, you loved him? The question struck deeper than Clara expected. Yes, very much. And you grieve him still? I'll probably always grieve him, in some way. He was a good man who died too young. Clara paused, choosing her words carefully. But grief doesn't mean my heart stopped working. It doesn't mean I can't love again. You think you love my son? Clara's breath caught. She looked at Jonah, whose expression had gone carefully blank, though she could see tension in the set of his shoulders. This was it, the moment where she either committed fully or retreated to safety. I think, she said slowly, that I'm falling in love with him, that I might already be more than halfway there. And that terrifies me because I know what it costs when love gets taken away. She turned back to Morningstar. But I'm here anyway. That should tell you something. Morningstar was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between Clara and Jonah. Then she nodded once as if some internal question had been answered. "You can stay," she said simply. "In the unmarried women's lodge until you and my son decide what you're doing. Swift Eagle's wife Redbird will show you where things are, teach you our ways if you're willing to learn." "I'm willing." "Good." Morningstar stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "Jonah, take your woman to Redbird, then come back. We need to talk about the council meeting." Jonah rose, helping Clara to her feet. As they moved toward the lodge entrance, Morningstar spoke again. "Clara Whitmore." Clara turned back. "You heard him again," Morningstar said quietly, "and it won't matter how far you ride or where you hide. I will find you. Understand?" Despite the threat, or perhaps because of it, Clara felt a smile tug at her lips. "I understand, and I promise, if I ever hurt him that badly again, I'll save you the trouble and shoot myself." Morningstar's expression flickered with surprise, then grudging respect. "Maybe you are strong enough after all." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the camp in shades of amber and gold. Jonah led Clara through the maze of lodges until they reached one decorated with painted symbols Clara didn't recognize. "Redbird," he called out, "we need your help." A young woman emerged, pregnant enough that her condition was obvious even beneath her layers of clothing. Her face was open and kind, lit with curiosity as she looked at Clara. "This is the one?" she asked Jonah in English. "The widow who chased you halfway across the territory?" "This is Clara," Jonah confirmed. "She needs a place to stay, and someone to help her navigate my mother's expectations." Redbird laughed. "Morningstar already interrogated her? That was fast, even for her." She turned to Clara, her smile warm. "Come, I'll show you where you'll sleep. Fair warning, though. All the unmarried women are going to want to know everything about you and Jonah. Hope you're ready for questions." "More questions?" Clara groaned. "Your mother already wrung me dry." "That was just the opening round," Redbird winked. "Wait until the grandmothers get hold of you. They'll want to know your whole life story, your intentions, whether you can tan a hide, and if you're planning on giving Jonah sons or daughters first." Clara felt her face heat again. We're not yet," Redbird said cheerfully. "But everyone saw that kiss. And Jonah hasn't looked at anyone the way he looks at you in all the time he's been back. So expect speculation." Jonah cleared his throat. "I should go. My mother's waiting, and she gets impatient." He caught Clara's hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Will you be all right?" "I've survived worse than curious grandmothers." Clara squeezed his hand. "Go. Do whatever council business you need to do. I'll still be here when you're done." Something in his expression suggested he'd needed to hear that, needed the reassurance that she wouldn't disappear while he wasn't looking. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth flooding through her. "Later," he promised. "We'll talk. Really talk." "I'll hold you to that." She watched him walk away, tall and straight-backed, before turning to Redbird, who was watching her with undisguised interest. "You really did ride 3 weeks to find him?" Redbird asked. "Through mud and ice and one very territorial bear. And you're planning to stay, even though winter's coming again soon and life here isn't easy?" Clara thought about her empty cabin, about the loneliness that had become her constant companion, about the way Jonah's eyes lit up when he looked at her. Then she thought about Thomas's letter, about his final wish that she not spend her life alone. "I'm staying," she said firmly, "for as long as he'll have me." Redbird's smile widened. "Then come on. Let's get you settled, and prepare yourself. You're about to become the most interesting thing to happen in this camp in months." She wasn't wrong. Within an hour of entering the unmarried women's lodge, Clara found herself surrounded by curious faces, all of them asking questions in a mixture of English and Cheyenne. Redbird translated when necessary, and gradually Clara pieced together the story of Jonah's return. He'd arrived in early January, half frozen and carrying the weight of years away from his people. He'd been quiet at first, working alongside the men, helping hunt and build and repair, but he'd been distant too, as if some part of him was still elsewhere. "He talked about you," an older woman named Laughing Water said through Redbird's translation. "At the fires at night, about the widow in the mountains, about how you'd shown him kindness when you didn't have to, about how you'd made him want to stay even though he knew he had to leave." Claire's throat tightened. "He said that?" "He said more than that." Redbird grinned. He drove Swift Eagle half crazy, talking about you, about your strength and your stubbornness and the way you looked in firelight. We all thought he'd imagined you, that grief and exhaustion had created some phantom woman he'd built up in his mind. But then you showed up, Laughing Water continued, riding into camp alone like some warrior woman from the old stories. And we realized he hadn't imagined anything. If anything, he'd undersold you. Clara didn't know what to say to that. She'd spent so long thinking of herself as broken, as less than she'd been before Thomas died. But these women looked at her with respect, with curiosity, with acceptance she hadn't expected. "Tell us about your journey," a younger girl urged. "How did you find the camp? Weren't you afraid?" So Clara told them about reading Thomas's letter and realizing what she'd thrown away, about Samuel Pritchard's advice and her decision to risk everything for the chance at something real, about the long trail north, the storm she'd weathered, the bear that had nearly cost her everything. The women listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking questions or exclaiming at particularly dramatic moments. And as Clara talked, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time since Thomas died, she wasn't alone, wasn't isolated. She was part of something, this community, these women, this strange new life she was building. When she finally finished, Laughing Water reached over and patted her hand. "You'll do well here," she said through Redbird. "You have the heart of someone who knows what matters and isn't afraid to fight for it." "I'm terrified," Clara admitted. "I don't know your language, your customs, your ways. I don't know if I can adapt to this life." "You'll learn." Redbird shifted, wincing slightly as the baby kicked. "We all had to learn once. I came here from a different band 3 years ago when I married Swift Eagle. Didn't know anyone, couldn't speak the dialect properly, burned everything I tried to cook for the first month, but they were patient. They taught me. They'll teach you too." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've survived your first winter here and Morning Star has decided you're worthy of her son." Redbird's smile turned wry. "That woman has standards that would make the spirits themselves nervous." The women laughed, and Clara found herself laughing with them. It felt strange, this lightness, foreign after so long carrying nothing but grief. But good, too. Like maybe, just maybe, she could build something here, something new and different and hers. Outside, night had fallen completely. Through the lodge's smoke hole, Clara could see stars brilliant against the black sky. Somewhere out there, Jonah was dealing with council business, navigating the politics of a people pushed to the edge by forces beyond their control. And here she was, surrounded by women who'd accepted her with a generosity she hadn't earned, welcomed into a life she barely understood. But as the conversation flowed around her and Redbird translated the stories being shared, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt hope. Later, when the fire had burned low and most of the women had retreated to their sleeping furs, Clara slipped outside. The camp was quiet now, just the occasional murmur of voices from distant lodges and the crackle of dying fires. She wrapped her shawl tighter against the cold and walked to the camp's edge, where the lodges gave way to open land rolling toward distant mountains. She didn't hear Jonah approach. He moved too quietly for that. But she felt him, felt the familiar presence that had become as essential as breath. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Too much to think about." Clara leaned into him when his arm came around her shoulders. "Your mother is terrifying." "I know, but she likes you." "How can you tell?" "She threatened to hunt me down if I hurt you again." Jonah chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "That's how I can tell. If she didn't like you, she would have just told you to leave. The threat means she thinks you're worth the effort of keeping in line." Clara absorbed that, watching the stars wheel overhead. "The women in the lodge said you talked about me after you left." "I did. Probably too much." He paused. "I couldn't stop thinking about you, Clara. Couldn't stop wondering if you'd read the letter, if you understood, if maybe there was a chance you might—" He stopped, shaking his head. "I told myself it was foolish, that you'd grieve Thomas and move on with your life, and I was just a stranger who'd passed through during a storm. But I couldn't make myself believe it. I couldn't stop thinking about you either." Clara turned in his arms so she could see his face. "Every morning I'd wake up and the cabin felt wrong without you in it. Every night I'd light that candle in the window and wonder if you were safe, if you'd made it to your mother's people, if you ever thought about me." Jonah's hands came up to frame her face, his touch achingly gentle. Every day, every single day, I thought about you. And now that I'm here, Clara held her breath, needing to hear it. Now I'm terrified you'll realize what a mistake this is, that you'll wake up and see that I'm not worth what you risked to find me, that I can't give you the life you deserve. His voice roughened. I have nothing, Clara. No land, no money, no future beyond helping my people survive another winter. I can't offer you comfort or security or any of the things a woman should expect from a man. Clara reached up to cover his hands with hers. I didn't ride 3 weeks to find comfort or security. I rode 3 weeks to find you. That's all I want, Jonah. That's all I need. You say that now. I say it because it's true. She pulled his hands down but kept holding them. I had comfort with Thomas. I had security. And I loved him for it. But what I feel for you, it's different. Deeper somehow. Like you see parts of me Thomas never even knew existed. Like when I'm with you, I'm more myself than I've ever been. Jonah's breath caught. Clara, I love you. The words came out in a rush, desperate and true. I know it's too soon. I know we've barely spent any real time together. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is crazy and reckless and probably the worst decision I could make. But I love you anyway, and I'm not sorry for it. For a long moment, Jonah just stared at her, his expression a mixture of wonder and disbelief. Then he was kissing her, deep and hungry and full of all the things he couldn't say. Clara kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring everything she felt into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jonah pressed his forehead to hers. I love you too, he whispered. I've loved you since the first time you threatened to shoot me, since you gave me shelter when you had every reason to turn me away, since you showed me that kindness still existed in a world that had tried its best to beat it out of me. Clara laughed shakily. We're both crazy. Completely, Jonah smiled against her temple. But at least we're crazy together. They stood there in the darkness, holding each other as the camp settled into sleep around them. And for the first time since Thomas died, Clara felt truly at peace. Not because the grief was gone, it would never be fully gone, but because she'd found something new to balance it. She'd found love again. Different love, unexpected love, but love nonetheless. And this time, she wasn't letting go. The days that followed fell into a rhythm Clara had never expected but found herself craving. She woke each morning in the unmarried women's lodge, surrounded by the soft breathing of Redbird and the others, and emerged into a world utterly foreign yet increasingly familiar. The camp stirred to life with the sun, fires rekindled, children running between lodges, men heading out to hunt or tend the horse herd, while women gathered to work on the endless tasks that kept everyone fed and sheltered. Clara threw herself into learning with a determination that surprised even her. Redbird became her constant companion and teacher, patiently showing her how to prepare hides, how to recognize which plants were safe to gather, how to move through the camp without causing offense. The work was harder than anything Clara had done on her homestead. Her hands blistered and bled from scraping hides, her back ached from hours bent over sewing, her fingers went numb from the cold as she helped the other women gather firewood from the surrounding forests. But she never complained. Not when Laughing Water corrected her technique for the 3rd time that day. Not when she burned another meal trying to cook over an open fire instead of her familiar stove. Not even when she accidentally walked through a sacred space and had to endure Morningstar's sharp lecture about respecting traditions she didn't yet understand. She was being tested. She knew that. Every woman in the camp was watching to see if the White Widow would break, would give up, would prove too soft for this life. So Clara gritted her teeth and worked until her muscles screamed, smiled through her exhaustion, and asked questions even when the answers made her feel ignorant. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the women's attitudes began to shift. Laughing Water stopped correcting her quite so sharply. Redbird's praise came more freely. Even Morningstar, who remained stern and exacting, occasionally nodded approval when Clara completed a task properly. The evenings were Clara's favorite time. After the day's work was done and the camp gathered for the communal meal, she would find Jonah waiting at the edge of the women's lodge. He never pushed, never demanded her attention, just stood there with that quiet patience she'd come to associate with him, until she emerged. Then they would walk together to the edge of camp, to a spot overlooking the valley where they could talk away from curious eyes and listening ears. "Morning Star had me scraping hides for 6 hours today," Clara said one evening, showing him her raw, blistered palms. "I think she's trying to kill me through manual labor." Jonah took her hands gently, examining the damage with a frown. "She's testing you, seeing if you're serious about staying." "I gathered that." Clara watched him produce a small tin of salve from his pocket and begin rubbing it carefully into her torn skin. The sharp herbal scent made her eyes water, but the cooling relief was immediate. "Where did you get this?" "Made it. Learned from the medicine women years ago." His touch was achingly tender as he worked the salve into each blister. "You don't have to prove anything to her, Clara. You don't have to destroy yourself trying to earn approval." "Yes, I do." Clara met his gaze steadily. "Because I'm not just some visitor passing through. I want to build a life here, with you, with your people. And that means showing them I'm willing to do the work, willing to learn, willing to become part of something bigger than myself." Jonah was quiet for a moment, his fingers stilling on hers. "You're sure? This isn't the life you're used to, Clara. No cabin, no privacy, no loneliness," she interrupted softly. "No silence. No waking up every morning wondering if I'll make it through another day without going mad from isolation." She turned her hands so she could grip his. "I won't lie and say it's easy. It's not. Everything here is strange and difficult, and sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in how much I don't know. But Jonah, I'm not drowning. I'm learning to swim." He raised her bandaged hands to his lips, kissing each palm with a reverence that made her chest ache. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever known." "I'm stubborn. There's a difference." "No." His storm gray eyes held hers. "You're strong. You lost your husband, survived 4 months alone in the mountains, then rode 3 weeks through dangerous country to find a man you barely knew because you believed in something that might not even exist. That's not stubbornness, Clara. That's courage." She wanted to argue, to deflect the compliment, but the intensity in his expression stopped her. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed him, soft and slow, letting the action speak what words couldn't. When they finally drew apart, Jonah rested his forehead against hers. "The council met again today." Clara heard the weight in his voice. "What did they decide?" "The Indian agent from Fort Benson is coming next week. Says the government wants to relocate us further north onto even smaller land. Says we're too close to the white settlements, causing trouble." His jaw tightened. "We're not causing trouble. We're just trying to survive." "Can they force you to move?" "They can do whatever they want. They have guns and soldiers and the full weight of the government behind them." Jonah's voice was bitter. "We have pride and determination and not much else." Clara thought about the camp, the lodges that had been carefully constructed, the children playing between them, the small gardens the women had started preparing for spring planting. These people had already been pushed and relocated and diminished. How much more could they lose before there was nothing left? "What will you do?" she asked quietly. "Fight. Not with weapons, that's suicide, but with words, with negotiations, with whatever legal options we can find." He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "I'm going to Fort Benson with the council leaders when the agent comes. Try to argue our case, show them we're not the threat they claim we are." Fear spiked through Clara's chest. "That's dangerous. If the soldiers decide you're causing trouble, I know the risks." Jonah's hand came up to cup her cheek. "But I can't ask my people to stand and fight if I'm not willing to do the same. I came back here to help them, Clara, to use whatever small voice I have to make things better. I can't walk away from that just because it's dangerous." She wanted to beg him not to go, wanted to hold him here where she could see him, touch him, know he was safe. But she understood duty, understood the weight of promises made to people who depended on you, understood that the man she'd fallen in love with was the kind who stepped forward when others stepped back. "When do you leave?" she managed. 3 days. We'll be gone maybe a week, depending on how the negotiations go." He traced his thumb along her cheekbone. "Will you be all right while I'm gone?" "I'll manage. Redbird and the others will keep me busy enough that I won't have time to worry." It was a lie, and they both knew it, but Clara forced a smile anyway. "Just promise me you'll come back." "I promise." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. Nothing could keep me from coming back to you. 3 days later, Clara stood with the other women watching Jonah ride out alongside Swift Eagle, Morningstar's brother Walking Bear, and 2 other council members. He'd looked back once, catching her eye across the distance, and the love in his expression had nearly broken her resolve not to cry. Then he was gone, disappeared beyond the tree line, and Clara was left with nothing but work and worry to fill the empty days ahead. Redbird found her that afternoon behind the lodge, staring at nothing while her hands mechanically scraped at a hide that was already clean. "He'll come back," Redbird said, settling beside her with a grunt. The baby had dropped lower in recent days, and every movement seemed to cause discomfort. "You don't know that." "I know Jonah. I know he doesn't make promises he can't keep." Redbird took the scraping tool from Clara's hands. "And I know you're going to drive yourself crazy if you keep working like this. Come on. Laughing Water is teaching some of the younger girls how to bead. You should learn too." Clara wanted to refuse, wanted to stay in her misery, but Redbird's expression brooked no argument, so she followed the younger woman back to the main camp where a group had gathered around Laughing Water. The old woman looked up as they approached. "Ah, the widow. Come, sit. Your hands need gentler work today." Clara settled onto the ground, accepting the small piece of leather and handful of beads Laughing Water offered. The work was intricate, requiring focus and patience she wasn't sure she had. But as Laughing Water demonstrated the technique and the other women chimed in with advice and encouragement, Clara felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders. "You're thinking too hard," one of the younger girls said, watching Clara fumble with the thread. "Let your hands remember the pattern. Trust yourself." Trust herself. Clara almost laughed. She'd spent so long not trusting anything, not her judgment, not her heart, not her ability to choose correctly. But as she focused on the simple rhythm of needle and thread and bead, she found herself relaxing into the work. Her stitches grew steadier. The pattern began to emerge. "Better," Laughing Water approved. "You learn quickly when you stop fighting yourself." The word struck deeper than the old woman probably intended. Clara had been fighting herself for so long, fighting her grief, her loneliness, her feelings for Jonah, her fear of losing again. What would happen if she just stopped? If she trusted that she could survive whatever came next? The thought was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. That night, Clara lay awake in the lodge listening to the soft breathing of the other women. Somewhere out there, Jonah was making camp with the council members, maybe thinking of her the way she was thinking of him. The distance felt vast, insurmountable. But come morning, it would be one day less, one day closer to his return. She could survive this. She'd survived worse. The days crawled past with agonizing slowness. Clara threw herself into work with renewed determination, learning everything the women would teach her. She learned to tan hides properly, to identify edible plants even under snow, to sew the intricate patterns that decorated traditional clothing. She learned words in Cheyenne, halting, awkward attempts that made the children giggle, but that Morningstar corrected with exacting precision. On the 5th day, Redbird went into labor. Clara was with her when the pain started, had seen the younger woman's face go pale and tight. Within minutes, the women's lodge transformed into organized chaos. The older women took charge immediately, sending the younger girls for water and clean cloths, while Laughing Water and Morningstar settled Redbird onto a pile of furs. "You," Morningstar said, pointing at Clara. "You've seen birth before?" "No, Thomas and I never—" Clara's hands shook. "I don't know how to help." "Then you'll learn." Morningstar's expression softened slightly. "Redbird trusts you. She wants you here, so you stay." The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Clara had never witnessed anything so raw, so primal, so utterly terrifying and beautiful at once. Redbird screamed and wept, and cursed Swift Eagle's name while the older women offered encouragement and support. Clara held her hand, whispered whatever words of comfort she could manage, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. When the baby finally came, a boy, small but perfectly formed and furiously angry about his arrival, Clara found herself crying along with everyone else. Redbird held her son with shaking hands, while Laughing Water cut the cord and Morningstar cleaned the child with practiced efficiency. "He's beautiful," Clara whispered, staring at the tiny red face. "He's loud," Redbird laughed through her tears. "Like his father." Swift Eagle burst into the lodge moments later. propriety forgotten in his desperation to see his wife and child. The women scolded him for the intrusion, but stepped aside anyway, letting him kneel beside Redbird to stare in wonder at his son. "We did it," Redbird said, looking up at her husband with exhausted triumph. "We made this!" Swift Eagle couldn't seem to form words. He just nodded, tears streaming down his face as he touched one finger to his son's tiny hand. Clara slipped out quietly, leaving the new family to their moment. Outside, dawn was breaking over the camp, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. She walked to the edge of the settlement, to the spot where she and Jonah always met, and stared toward the south, where he'd disappeared days ago. "Come back," she thought fiercely. "Come back and see what we're building here. Come back and let me tell you about Redbird's baby and the beadwork I finished and all the small moments that made up the days without you. Come back so I can stop being afraid." The 6th day brought fresh snow and no word from the council delegation. Clara tried not to worry, tried to remember that negotiations took time and weather could delay travel. But fear gnawed at her, whispering all the terrible possibilities. What if the soldiers had arrested them? What if there'd been violence? What if Jonah was hurt, or worse, and she'd never even had the chance to say goodbye? Morningstar found her that evening, sitting alone outside the women's lodge and staring at nothing. "You're making yourself sick with worry," the older woman said bluntly. "I can't help it." "Yes, you can. You can choose to trust that my son is smart enough and strong enough to come home. Or you can choose to torture yourself with fears that may never come true." Morningstar settled beside her with a sigh. "I've buried a husband and 2 children. I know what it costs to love people in a world that takes them away. But Clara, that fear, it can consume you if you let it. It can make you so afraid of losing that you never fully have anything at all." Clara's throat tightened. "How do you bear it? The fear?" "By choosing to live anyway. By choosing to love anyway." Morningstar's expression gentled. "You think I'm not terrified every time Jonah leaves this camp? You think I don't imagine every terrible thing that could happen to him? But I can't let that fear stop me from being proud of who he is, what he's doing. Can't let it stop me from accepting the woman he brought home and hoping she'll give me grandchildren someday." Clara's head whipped around. "What?" Morningstar's lips twitched with something that might have been amusement. "You think I don't see how he looks at you? How you look at him? You're both trying to be proper and respectful, waiting for some perfect moment to make things official. But Clara, there are no perfect moments. Not out here. There's just now, and what you choose to do with it." We haven't even talked about. Then talk about it when he gets back. But stop wasting time being afraid." Morningstar stood, groaning slightly. "I didn't approve of you at first. Thought you were too soft, too white, too likely to run at the first hardship. But you've proven me wrong. You have the heart of someone who belongs here. So stop acting like you don't deserve what you've found." She walked away before Clara could respond, leaving her alone with thoughts that tumbled over each other like river stones. Grandchildren, marriage, a future she'd barely let herself imagine because imagination felt like tempting fate. But Morningstar was right. She'd been so focused on surviving each day that she'd forgotten to actually live. Forgotten to let herself want things, plan for things, hope for things beyond just getting through. When Jonah came back, not if, when, they needed to talk. Really talk. About what they wanted, what they were building, whether the feelings between them were strong enough to base a life on. The thought terrified her, but it also filled her with something that felt dangerously close to joy. On the 7th day, as the sun climbed toward noon, a shout went up from the camp's edge. Clara dropped the hide she'd been working and ran with everyone else toward the source of the commotion. 5 riders emerged from the tree line. 5, not 4. Clara's heart stuttered as she counted again, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Jonah rode at the front, Swift Eagle beside him, Walking Bear and the other 2 council members behind. But there was a 6th horse, and on it, "Riders coming," someone shouted. "They brought someone back." The delegation entered the camp to a mixture of relief and curiosity. Clara pushed through the gathering crowd, her eyes locked on Jonah. He looked tired, lines of exhaustion carved deep around his eyes. But he was whole, alive, home. Their gazes met across the distance, and something in her chest loosened, allowing her to breathe fully for the first time in 7 days. But before she could reach him, Morningstar stepped forward to address her son. "What news?" Jonah dismounted, his expression grim. "The agent gave us 6 months. 6 months to gather our people and move to the new reservation lands 200 miles north. After that, they're sending the army to forcibly relocate anyone who remains." Angry murmurs rippled through the crowd. Morningstar's face hardened like stone. "And if we refuse? Then they'll make us, one way or another." Jonah's hands clenched at his sides. "I argued, we all argued, showed them our treaty rights, our legal claims to this land. But the agent said the treaties don't matter anymore. That progress requires we move out of the way." Progress. Walking Bear spat the word like a curse. "They mean they found gold in the mountains. Heard them talking about it when they thought we couldn't understand their English." The crowd's anger grew louder. Clara watched fear and fury war across familiar faces, people who'd already lost so much being told they'd have to lose more. Her heart broke for them, for the impossible choice they faced. Then Swift Eagle cleared his throat. "There's more. Show them, Jonah." Jonah turned and helped the mysterious sixth rider dismount. Clara's breath caught as she got her first clear look at him. A white man, maybe 40, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years in hard country. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, sharp and intelligent, and taking in everything with the careful assessment of someone trained to notice details. "This is Marcus Brennan," Jonah said. "He's a lawyer from Denver. He heard about our case and offered to help." Brennan stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the assembled crowd. When he spoke, his voice carried clear authority. "I won't lie to you. The government has the power and the guns and most of the law on their side, but not all of it. There are precedents, legal arguments we can make. It'll take time and it'll be a fight. But if you're willing to try, I'm willing to help you try." "Why?" Morningstar's question cut through the murmurs. "Why would a white lawyer help us?" Brennan met her gaze steadily. "Because I fought in the war. Saw what happened when people decided some lives mattered less than others. I didn't like it then, and I don't like it now. So when Greyhawk found me and told me what was happening here, I decided maybe I could do something useful for once." The silence that followed felt fragile, balanced on a knife's edge between hope and skepticism. Then Walking Bear spoke. "What do you need from us?" "Documentation, witnesses, any evidence you have of your legal right to this land, and time. We need to file the case before the 6-month deadline, which means we need to move fast." Brennan pulled a notebook from his coat. "I'll need to interview people, take statements, build our argument. It won't be easy, and there's no guarantee we'll win. But we can try." Morningstar looked at Jonah. "You trust this man?" "I do. He could be making money in Denver defending railroad companies. Instead, he rode here in winter to help people he's never met. That tells me something about his character." Slowly, Morningstar nodded. "Then we'll try. We'll fight with words and law instead of bullets. And if we lose—" Her expression hardened. "If we lose, at least we'll have fought." The crowd murmured agreement, and just like that, the decision was made. They would resist, not with violence, but with the very system that was trying to destroy them. Clara watched it all with a mixture of pride and terror. This was dangerous. Taking on the government, challenging their authority. It could end badly in so many ways. But looking at the determined faces around her, at Jonah standing straight-backed and resolute beside this lawyer who'd come to help, she felt something shift inside her. These were her people now. Their fight was her fight, and she'd stand with them however she could. The crowd dispersed slowly, people moving to prepare lodging and food for Brennan, while the council leaders gathered to discuss strategy. Clara finally made her way to Jonah, who'd been watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You came back," she said, the words inadequate for everything she felt. "I promised I would." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Clara, we need to talk." Her heart stuttered. "About what?" "About everything. About us. About what happens next." He glanced around at the busy camp. "Can we—" "Yes." She cut him off, already pulling him toward their usual spot at the edge of camp. "Yes, we can talk. We should talk. We need to talk." They walked in silence until they reached the overlook, where the valley spread out below them in winter's stark beauty. Clara's mind raced with everything she wanted to say, everything she'd realized while he was gone. But Jonah spoke first. "I love you," he said quietly. "I need you to know that before anything else. I love you, Clara Whitmore, and I want to build a life with you, but you need to understand what that means now." Clara's throat tightened. "Because of the relocation. Because of everything. The legal fight could take months, even years. We might win or we might lose everything. And even if we win, the government could find other ways to force us out. Life here, it's never going to be easy or safe or certain." He turned to face her fully. "So I need to know if you're really ready for that. If you're ready to tie yourself to someone whose future is this uncertain." Clara looked at him, at this man who'd stumbled into her life during a snowstorm and changed everything. At the face she'd memorized, the hands she'd dreamed about, the heart she'd somehow claimed without meaning to. "I rode 3 weeks through dangerous country to find you," she said softly. "I learned a new language, new customs, new ways of living. I scraped hides until my hands bled, and listened to your mother interrogate me about my intentions, and held Redbird's hand while she gave birth. I did all of that knowing I might lose you anyway, knowing the future was uncertain, knowing there were no guarantees." She moved closer, placing her palm over his heart. "I'm not afraid of uncertain, Jonah. I'm afraid of safe and lonely. I'm afraid of waking up 20 years from now and realizing I let fear talk me out of the best thing that ever happened to me." His hands came up to cup her face. "Marry me." The words hung in the cold air between them, simple and world-changing. "What?" Clara breathed. "Marry me. Not someday when things are settled or safe or certain. Now, tomorrow. As soon as we can." His gray eyes blazed with intensity. "Because Morningstar's right. There are no perfect moments. There's just now and what we choose to do with it. And I choose you, Clara. I choose us." Tears blurred her vision. "Yes. Yes? Yes." She laughed through the tears. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to uncertain and difficult and whatever comes next. Yes to all of it, as long as it's with you." Jonah kissed her then, deep and claiming, his arms crushing her against him as if he could make them one person through sheer force of will. Clara kissed him back with everything she had, pouring 7 days of fear and longing and love into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jonah rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have a ring to give you, don't have land or money or anything most grooms should have." "I don't care about any of that." Clara's fingers tangled in his hair. "I have you, that's enough. It has to be enough, because it's all I've got. Then it's everything." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "When?" "Tomorrow. We'll ask the elders to perform the ceremony. It won't be legal in White Eyes. We'd need to ride to Fort Benson for that, get the proper papers filed. But it'll be real to us, to my people. And if you want the legal ceremony later, we can do that too." Clara thought about it for maybe 3 seconds. "Tomorrow's perfect. I don't need the government's permission to marry the man I love." Jonah's smile was brilliant, transforming his usually serious face into something incandescent. "My mother's going to say we're rushing." "Your mother told me to stop wasting time being afraid." "She did?" "Yesterday. Said I should stop acting like I don't deserve what I found." Clara smiled. "So I'm taking her advice." They walked back to camp hand in hand, and somehow word had already spread. Redbird met them at the entrance to the women's lodge, her baby cradled against her chest and a knowing smile on her face. "Finally," she said, "I was wondering how long you two would keep dancing around each other." "How did you—" "Everyone saw you walk off together. Everyone saw you come back looking like that." Redbird gestured at their joined hands, their faces. "You're both terrible at hiding what you feel. The whole camp's been waiting for you to figure it out." Clara felt heat flood her cheeks. "We want to marry. Tomorrow. Is that— Can we do that?" Redbird's smile widened. "I'll tell Morningstar. She'll arrange everything." She paused, studying Clara's face. "You're sure? Marriage here, it's not like white marriage. You'll be part of this community, bound by our laws and customs. There's no going back." "I don't want to go back," Clara said firmly. "I want to go forward, with Jonah, with all of you." Redbird shifted the baby to her other arm and pulled Clara into an awkward one-armed embrace. "Welcome to the family, sister." That night, Clara lay awake in the lodge, listening to the soft sounds of the other women sleeping. Tomorrow she would marry Jonah Greyhawk. Tomorrow she would bind her life to his in front of his people, his community, the world he'd brought her into. Tomorrow she would become something new, not the widow Clara Whitmore, but simply Clara, Jonah's wife, part of this place. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a peace she hadn't felt since before Thomas died. She was ready. Ready to stop grieving what she'd lost and start building what she'd found. Ready to trust that love could survive uncertainty, that belonging didn't require safety, that home wasn't a place but the people you chose to stand with. Tomorrow, everything would change. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara couldn't wait. Morning came wrapped in frost and anticipation. Clara woke before dawn to find the women's lodge already stirring with quiet activity. Redbird sat nursing her son while Laughing Water and two other women sorted through bundles of clothing and ornaments with serious expressions. "Finally awake," Redbird said when she noticed Clara sitting up. "We were going to let you sleep another hour, but there's too much to do." Clara rubbed sleep from her eyes, her stomach fluttering with nerves. "Is all this necessary? I thought we were keeping it simple." Simple doesn't mean without ceremony. Laughing Water approached with a bundle of soft leather. "You're marrying into this community that deserves to be honored properly, even if we only have a day to prepare." What followed was a whirlwind of activity that left Clara's head spinning. The women bathed her with water heated over the fire and scented with sage, washing away not just dirt, but symbolically cleansing her for the transition ahead. They braided her hair with careful precision, weaving in small decorative elements Clara didn't recognize but understood were significant. Then came the dress, soft deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork that must have taken weeks to complete. "This was mine," Morningstar said quietly, appearing in the lodge entrance with the garment draped over her arms. "When I married Jonah's father, I've been saving it, hoping my son would find someone worthy of wearing it." Clara's throat tightened as she looked at the beautiful craftsmanship, the love embedded in every stitch. "I can't. This is too precious." "You can, and you will." Morningstar's voice was firm but not unkind. "You've earned it, not through perfection, but through persistence. Through choosing my son and this life, even when it would have been easier to walk away." She helped Clara into the dress, her hands surprisingly gentle. "My husband died when Jonah was young, left me alone with a child in a world that kept trying to take everything I had left. I understand what it means to lose and keep living anyway, to find love a second time and be brave enough to claim it." Clara met the older woman's eyes in the dim light. "I'll take care of him. I know you will, and he'll take care of you." Morningstar adjusted the dress, smoothing the leather over Clara's shoulders. "That's what marriage is. Two people choosing each other over and over, especially when it's hard. Especially when the world gives you every reason to give up." Outside, the camp had transformed. Someone had cleared a space near the central fire and laid fresh pine boughs on the frozen ground. The whole community gathered in a loose circle, their faces solemn but not unhappy. Children darted between adults' legs while the elders took their places near the fire, their weathered faces carrying the weight of tradition. Clara's hands shook as Redbird led her from the lodge. Every eye turned toward her, and for a moment the attention was overwhelming. But then she saw Jonah standing across the circle, and everything else faded. He wore traditional clothing she'd never seen before, leather and beadwork and symbols she didn't yet understand but that spoke to heritage and belonging. His dark hair hung loose past his shoulders, and in the morning light with his people gathered around him, he looked utterly at home in a way she'd never seen before. Their eyes met and held. Clara watched his expression shift from solemnity to wonder, saw his breath catch as he took in the sight of her in his mother's wedding dress. And in that moment, every doubt she'd ever harbored about this choice evaporated like morning mist. She loved him. He loved her. Everything else was just details. Walking Bear, serving as elder for the ceremony, raised his hands and the crowd fell silent. He spoke first in Cheyenne, his voice carrying across the gathering with the resonance of ritual. Clara didn't understand the words, but she felt their weight, their significance. This was about more than just two people joining lives. It was about community, continuity, the defiant act of building futures in a world trying to erase them. Then he switched to English, his accent thick but his meaning clear. We gather to witness the joining of Jonah Greyhawk and Clara Whitmore, two people from different worlds who have chosen to make one world together, two hearts that beat as one, two lives that will walk the same path from this day forward. He gestured and Jonah stepped forward. Clara did the same, her legs steadier than she'd expected. They met in the center of the circle, in front of the fire that represented home and hearth, and the warmth that sustained life through harsh winters. Walking Bear continued, "Marriage is not for the weak. It requires strength to be vulnerable, courage to trust, wisdom to know when to hold tight and when to let go. It requires choosing your partner even when anger makes you want to walk away, choosing forgiveness even when pride demands punishment, choosing love even when fear whispers that loss is inevitable." He looked at Jonah. "Do you choose this woman? Do you promise to stand with her through whatever comes, to honor her strength while protecting her heart, to build with her a life worthy of the ancestors' blessing?" Jonah's voice rang clear. "I do. I choose her, now and always." Walking Bear turns to Clara. "Do you choose this man? Do you promise to stand with him through whatever comes, to honor his strength while protecting his heart, to build with him a life worthy of the ancestors' blessing?" Clara's voice didn't shake. "I do. I choose him, now and always." "Then join your hands." Their fingers interlaced, and Walking Bear wrapped a length of soft leather around their joined hands, binding them together. "What we tie here, we pray remains tied. What we join here, we pray remains joined. Let no outside force break what these two have chosen to build." He produced a small bowl containing what looked like water mixed with herbs. "Drink together, share breath, share life, share the sacred covenant of marriage." Jonah lifted the bowl to Clara's lips first. She drank, tasting sage and something bitter and earthy. Then she held it for him while he drank, their eyes never leaving each other's faces. The intimacy of the gesture, the trust required to share from the same vessel, struck Clara as more profound than any words. Walking Bear took the bowl back and raised his voice to address the whole gathering. "Witness what has been done here. Jonah Greyhawk and Clara Whitmore are now joined. What they have chosen, we honor. What they build, we support. What they face together and with this community standing behind them." The crowd erupted in approval. Not polite applause, but genuine celebration. Children shrieked with laughter and women ululated while men shouted congratulations. Someone started drumming and others joined in, the rhythm ancient and primal and utterly joyful. Walking Bear unwrapped their hands and Jonah immediately pulled Clara close, kissing her in front of everyone with a passion that made several people whistle and laugh. Clara kissed him back, not caring about propriety or tradition or anything except the fact that this man was now her husband, her choice, her future. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Morning Star approached carrying a bundle wrapped in soft cloth. She pressed it into Clara's hands. "This was your husband's," she said quietly. "Thomas's. The letter you carried here, the one Jonah tried to give you. I kept it safe while you were learning our ways, but now you should have it back. Both your pasts deserve to be honored in the life you're building." Clara unwrapped the bundle with shaking hands to find not just the letter, but also a small leather pouch. Inside was Thomas's wedding ring, the one she'd thought lost when they'd sent his personal effects back months ago. "How?" She looked up at Morning Star with tears in her eyes. "Jonah found it with the letter, kept it safe, waiting for the right moment to return it." Morning Star's expression gentled. "Your first husband loved you enough to send someone to make sure you'd be taken care of. That deserves to be remembered, honored, kept as part of your story instead of buried with your grief." Clara looked at Jonah, who watched her with careful understanding. "You kept this all this time? I thought you might want it someday. Thought maybe when you were ready, you'd want something to remember him by. That didn't hurt quite so much." He touched her cheek gently. "Thomas was part of making you who you are, Clara. I'm not threatened by that. I'm grateful to him for seeing what you needed and trusting me to help provide it. The generosity in that statement, the security it took to honor the man who'd come before him, made Clara love him even more fiercely. She tucked the ring back into the pouch and handed it to Redbird. Keep this safe for me, for our children someday, when they're old enough to understand that love doesn't diminish when you find it twice, that you can honor what you've lost while building what you've found. Redbird accepted the bundle with a solemn nod, and the moment passed as more people pressed forward to offer congratulations and blessings. Clara found herself pulled into embraces by women who'd seemed suspicious mere weeks ago, received handshakes from men who'd watched her with wary eyes, and accepted shy gifts from children who'd giggled at her clumsy attempts to speak their language. The celebration continued through the day. Food appeared from every lodge, more than Clara had seen since arriving in camp. Venison and rabbit stewed with wild roots, fry bread sweetened with precious sugar, dried berries mixed with fat, and formed into dense cakes that melted on the tongue. People ate and drank and told stories, and as the sun climbed toward noon, Clara realized she'd never felt more welcomed anywhere in her life. But beneath the joy, tension simmered. She could see it in the way Marcus Brennan, the lawyer, spoke intensely with the council members at the edge of the gathering. Could hear it in snatches of conversation that switched to Cheyenne when she drew near. The celebration was real, but so was the threat hanging over all of them. 6 months to pack up and leave or face forced removal by the army. As afternoon stretched toward evening, Jonah found Clara watching the camp with troubled eyes. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You're worrying," he murmured. "I'm thinking. There's a difference." "Not much of one on your face." He kissed her temple. "What's troubling you, wife?" "Wife." The word sent warmth flooding through her despite her concerns. All these people celebrating when they don't know what's coming, when in 6 months they might lose everything. They know exactly what's coming. That's why they're celebrating. Jonah turned her to face him. "Clara, these people, my people, they've survived centuries of loss, disease, war, broken treaties, forced relocations. They know how to hold joy and grief at the same time. Know that celebrating today doesn't mean ignoring tomorrow's problems. It means choosing to live fully in whatever moments you're given." Clara understood the truth in that, but it didn't ease the knot in her chest. What if Brennan can't help? What if the legal case fails? Then we'll deal with that when it comes. But right now, today, we're married, and the whole camp is celebrating with us. Can that be enough? Just for today? She wanted to argue, to plan, to control something in a situation where she had so little control. But looking at Jonah, at her husband, this man who'd traveled through a blizzard to keep a promise and ended up giving her a future, Clara made herself nod. "Just for today," she agreed. "Tomorrow we can worry about saving the world. Today we celebrate." His smile was brilliant. "Good. Because Swift Eagle's been waiting for an excuse to break out the whiskey he's been hoarding, and I told him a wedding seemed like appropriate justification." The evening dissolved into music and laughter and stories told in 2 languages around fires that pushed back the cold. Clara sat with Jonah's arm around her, listening to tales of ancestors and heroes, of tricksters and survivors, of a people who refused to disappear no matter how hard the world tried to erase them. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the defiance in them, the pride, the determination to remain. Late in the night, as the fires burned low and children were carried to bed by tired parents, Morning Star approached the newlyweds. She carried a bundle of furs and blankets. "Your lodge," she said simply. "Swift Eagle and the others prepared it this afternoon. It's not much, but it's yours. A place to start building your life together." Clara's eyes widened. "You built us a lodge? In one day?" "The frame was already there, belonged to a family that moved north last spring. We just made it habitable." Morning Star's expression was unreadable in the firelight. "A married couple needs privacy, and my son deserves a home to bring his wife to." She led them to a small lodge at the camp's edge, near the overlook where Clara and Jonah had spent so many evenings talking. Inside, fresh furs covered the ground, and a small fire burned in the central pit. Someone had even brought Clara's pack from the women's lodge and Jonah's few belongings from wherever he'd been staying. Morning Star handed Jonah the bundle of blankets. "Be happy," she said quietly, "both of you, for as long as you're given." Then she left them alone. Clara stood in the center of their new home, suddenly shy despite everything they'd shared, everything they'd promised. This was different. This was their wedding night, the moment when words became action, when promises became reality. Jonah seemed to sense her nervousness. He set the blankets down carefully and moved to her side. "We don't have to. If you're not ready, we can just sleep. Just be together. There's no rush." Clara turned to face him, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I'm not nervous because I'm not ready. I'm nervous because I am. Because this is real now. We're married. This is our home, our life. And I want—" She stopped, searching for words. "What do you want, Clara?" "Everything. I want everything with you, all of it, the joy and the fear and the uncertainty and the hope. I want to build a life that honors what I've lost while celebrating what I've found. I want children with your eyes and your strength. I want to grow old beside you and know that every choice I made led me exactly where I was supposed to be." Jonah's hands trembled as they framed her face. "I can't promise you easy. Can't promise you safe. The next months, maybe years, they're going to be hard. There's going to be fighting and fear and probably loss. I can't protect you from all of that. I'm not asking you to protect me from it. I'm asking you to face it with me." Clara rose on her toes, bringing her lips close to his. "Together, Jonah. Whatever comes, we face it together." He kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of promise. And as they sank down onto the furs together, as they finally gave their bodies what their hearts had already claimed, Clara felt the last pieces of her grief transform into something new. Not forgotten, never forgotten, but integrated. Part of her story instead of the whole of it. She had loved Thomas. Would always love him in the way you love someone who shaped you, changed you, gave you pieces of yourself you hadn't known existed. But she loved Jonah too. Loved him with a fierceness that came from choosing rather than simply falling. Loved him with the wisdom of someone who knew what loss cost and chose to risk it anyway. And as the fire burned low and they held each other in the darkness of their new home, Clara understood with crystalline clarity that she hadn't replaced one love with another. She'd simply proven that the heart was more expansive than grief wanted you to believe, that you could honor the past while building the future, that choosing to love again didn't diminish what you'd lost. It celebrated the fact that you'd survived it. The weeks that followed were a strange mixture of joy and tension. Clara threw herself into being a wife, learning from Morning Star and the other women how to manage a household according to Cheyenne customs. She learned which tasks were hers and which were Jonah's, learned the rhythms of married life in a community where privacy was limited but support was abundant, and she watched Marcus Brennan work tirelessly to build their legal case. The lawyer spent long hours interviewing elders, documenting treaty violations, compiling evidence of the community's legal right to remain on their land. He traveled back and forth to Fort Benson and Denver, filing papers, making arguments, pushing against a system designed to ignore people like the Northern Cheyenne. "It's not looking good," he admitted one evening as he, Jonah, and Clara shared a meal in their lodge. Winter had deepened, making travel treacherous, and Brennan had been stuck in camp for 3 days waiting for the weather to clear. The territorial governor is under pressure from mining interests. They want this land opened up for prospecting, and the Cheyenne are just obstacles to remove. "Can we fight it?" Jonah's jaw was tight. "We can try. I've found some precedents, cases where tribes successfully argued against relocation. But Clara, Jonah, I need you to understand how rare that is, how unlikely." Brennan set down his coffee with a heavy sigh. "The law should be on your side. The treaties should protect you. But law and justice don't always align, especially when money and power are involved." Clara reached for Jonah's hand under the blanket they shared. "So what do we do?" "We keep fighting. I file the case, we make the strongest argument we can, and we pray the judge is one of the rare ones who cares more about justice than politics." Brennan met their eyes. "But you should also prepare for the possibility that we lose, that you'll have to choose between relocating peacefully or facing the army." The words hung heavy in the warm air of the lodge. Clara felt Jonah's hand tighten around hers, felt the tension radiating from him. "If it comes to that," Jonah said quietly, "if the legal case fails, what would you advise?" Brennan was silent for a long moment. "I'd advise survival. There's no honor in martyrdom, no victory in dying for land you can't hold. If the army comes, you can't win that fight. Not with guns, not with bodies." He paused. "But that doesn't mean you've lost everything. Land can be taken, but community survives. Culture survives. People survive if they're willing to adapt. That's easy for you to say. Jonah's voice held an edge Clara had rarely heard. You can leave anytime you want. Go back to Denver, back to your life. We're the ones who'll have to live with whatever we choose. You're right, and I'm sorry. Brennan didn't flinch from the anger. I'm doing everything I can legally, but I won't lie to you about the odds. You deserve the truth, even when it's hard to hear. After he left, Clara and Jonah sat in silence, the fire casting dancing shadows on the lodge walls. Finally, Clara spoke. What will you do? If the case fails? Jonah was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, I'll do what my people have always done. I'll survive. We'll relocate if we have to, rebuild somewhere else. It won't be the first time. Probably won't be the last. He turned to look at her, his expression haunted. But Clara, if that happens, if we have to leave this place, you don't have to come with us. You could go back to your cabin, back to white society. Could claim you were just visiting, that the marriage wasn't real in legal terms. Could build a safe life somewhere the government isn't trying to erase you. Clara stared at him in disbelief. You think I'd leave you? I think I don't want you to suffer for choosing me. Jonah Greyhawk, you listen to me. Clara moved to straddle his lap so he had to look at her directly. I married you, not the land, not the camp, not the life I thought we'd have. You, and wherever you go, I go. If your people relocate, I relocate. If they fight, I fight beside them. And if you think I traveled 3 weeks through winter and learned a whole new way of living just to abandon you at the first real challenge, then you don't know me at all. Emotion flickered across his face, relief and fear and love all tangled together. It could be years before we're settled again, years of hardship and uncertainty. I've had enough certainty to last a lifetime, and it didn't protect me from loss. So I'll take uncertain with you over safe without you. She kissed him fiercely. We're in this together. That's what marriage means. That's what I chose. He pulled her close, burying his face in her neck. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. They held each other as the fire burned down, drawing strength from the connection between them. Outside, wind howled through the camp, rattling lodge poles and sending snow swirling through the darkness. But inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Clara felt warm enough to face whatever came. The legal case was filed in early March, just as the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring emerged. Brennan presented their arguments to a territorial judge in Fort Benson, laying out the treaty violations and legal precedents with the precision of someone who'd spent his whole career making arguments that mattered. The judge took 2 weeks to deliberate, 2 weeks in which the camp held its collective breath, in which people prepared for both victory and defeat, in which Clara watched Jonah wear himself thin, trying to be strong for everyone who looked to him for leadership. On a wet April morning with rain turning the world gray and formless, a rider arrived from Fort Benson carrying the judge's decision. The whole camp gathered as Walking Bear opened the official document and read it aloud, first in English and then translated into Cheyenne. The judge had ruled in their favor. The relocation order was suspended pending further review of the treaty violations. The Northern Cheyenne could remain on their current land while the government conducted a full investigation into whether proper legal procedures had been followed. It wasn't total victory, just a stay of execution, a reprieve that bought them time. But as Clara watched the camp erupt in cautious celebration, watched Jonah embrace his mother with tears streaming down both their faces, she understood that sometimes time was the greatest gift you could receive. Time to build stronger cases, time to organize resistance, time to prove they deserve to remain, time to live. Marcus Brennan stayed for the celebration, accepting gratitude and congratulations with humble grace. But before he left the next morning to return to Denver, he pulled Clara and Jonah aside. This isn't over, he said seriously. The investigation could take months, even years, and there's no guarantee it'll rule in your favor. You need to use this time wisely, document everything, build alliances, prepare for the possibility that you'll have to fight this battle again. We will. Jonah clasped the lawyer's hand. Thank you for everything. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're still here in 5 years, 10 years, when your children are playing in these mountains, and the government has finally accepted it can't remove you. Brennan turned to Clara. Take care of him and of yourself. You're stronger than you think. strong enough to help lead these people through whatever comes next. After he left, Clara stood with Jonah on their usual overlook, watching the camp below. Children played in the mud created by melting snow. Women hung wet clothes to dry in the pale sunlight. Men worked on expanding the horse corrals and planning where gardens would go when the ground thawed enough to plant. Life continuing, life adapting, life refusing to be extinguished. "What are you thinking?" Jonah asked, his arm warm around her waist. "I'm thinking about that night you knocked on my door, how terrified I was, how certain I was that letting you in would be a mistake." Clara leaned into him. "I'm thinking about how wrong I was, how that single choice changed everything. You could have turned me away, probably should have. But I didn't. I saw someone who needed help and I helped them, even though it scared me, even though I had every reason to protect myself instead." She turned to face him. "That's what we all have to keep doing, isn't it? Keep choosing to help, keep choosing to hope, keep choosing to build even when the world keeps trying to tear down. It's exhausting." "It is. But it's also how we survive." Clara took his hand, pressing it against her still flat stomach. "How we make sure there's something worth surviving for." Jonah's eyes widened as he processed her meaning. "Clara, are you?" "I think so. It's too early to be certain, but I think so." She smiled at his shocked expression. "Are you happy?" Instead of answering with words, he swept her up and spun her around, laughing with a joy she'd rarely heard from him. When he set her down, his hands were gentle on her face. "I'm terrified, and thrilled, and more grateful than I have words for." He kissed her softly. "You've given me everything, Clara. A home, a future, now this. How do I ever thank you enough? By being here. By standing with me through whatever comes. By being the father our child deserves, and the husband I chose." She covered his hands with hers. "That's all the thanks I need." They stood together on the overlook as spring slowly reclaimed the world from winter's grip. Below them, the camp bustled with life and determination. Above them, the sky stretched endless and blue, full of possibility. The fight wasn't over. The threat hadn't disappeared. There would be more battles ahead, legal, political, personal, more uncertainty, more fear, more moments when giving up seemed easier than continuing. But Clara had learned something in the months since a desperate knock had brought Jonah to her door. She'd learned that strength wasn't about never being afraid. It was about moving forward despite the fear. She'd learned that love didn't diminish when you found it twice. It expanded, proving the heart's capacity for regeneration and growth. She'd learned that belonging wasn't about being born into something. It was about choosing it and being chosen in return. She'd learned that home wasn't a place, but the people you stood with when everything else was uncertain. 1 year later, Clara stood in the same spot holding her daughter against her chest. The baby, named Sarah for Clara's mother, and given the Cheyenne name Morning Light, slept peacefully, unaware of the significance of the day. The government's investigation had concluded 3 months ago with a ruling that vindicated the Northern Cheyenne's claims. The relocation order was permanently rescinded. The tribe could remain on their land, protected by treaties that finally meant something. It wasn't perfect. There were still restrictions, still tensions with white settlers, still threats from mining companies who coveted the mountains. But it was victory enough. It was survival. It was proof that fighting could sometimes lead to winning. Marcus Brennan had traveled from Denver for the celebration, bringing with him official documents that made Clara and Jonah's marriage legal in White Eyes, as well as Cheyenne tradition. They'd signed the papers that morning, making official what had been true in their hearts for over a year. "What are you thinking about?" Jonah asked, coming up behind her as he always did, his arms wrapping around both wife and daughter. "Everything. The past year. How much has changed. How much we've built." Clara leaned back against him. "I was thinking about Thomas, too. About how he'd be happy I found this. Found you. Found a way to keep living instead of just surviving. He gave us both a gift. The promise brought me to you. The letter gave you permission to move forward." Jonah kissed her temple. "I'll always be grateful to him for that." Below them, the camp prepared for another celebration. Redbird chased her toddler son through the muddy paths while pregnant again with her second child. Swift Eagle worked on expanding their lodge to accommodate the growing family. Morning Star directed a group of young women in food preparation, her voice carrying sharp corrections and unexpected praise in equal measure. life continuing, life expanding, life winning. Do you ever regret it? Jonah asked quietly. Choosing this life over the safety you could have had? Clara didn't have to think about her answer. Never, not once. This life, it's harder than anything I imagined. It's uncertain and challenging and sometimes terrifying. But Jonah, it's also fuller than anything I've known. Richer, more real. She shifted the baby in her arms. I spent 4 months alone in that cabin thinking safety was what mattered. But safety without purpose is just another kind of death. This, she gestured at the camp, the mountains, their daughter, him. This is living. That night, as the camp celebrated their victory with music and food and stories, Clara found herself thinking about that Christmas Eve over a year ago, about the candle in the window and the desperate knock that had changed everything, about the choice to open the door despite her fear, to offer shelter to a stranger, to allow kindness when cruelty would have been safer. She thought about how a single moment of mercy had transformed her entire life, had given her love when she thought she'd never love again, had given her family when she thought she'd spend the rest of her days alone, had given her purpose and belonging and a reason to wake up excited about what each day might bring. The candle no longer burned in a window. They had no cabin window to place it in. But Clara carried its meaning in her heart. The reminder that you never knew what lost soul might need finding, that sometimes the person you saved by offering shelter was yourself. Jonah found her standing at the edge of the celebration, watching their daughter sleep in Morning Star's arms while the older woman crooned a Cheyenne lullaby. Happy? He asked, pulling her close. Clara thought about happiness, how it wasn't the absence of hardship but the presence of meaning, how it wasn't safety but connection, how it wasn't certainty but love that made life worth living. Yes, she said simply, I'm happy. And she was. Despite the challenges they'd faced and the ones that would surely come. Despite the loss she carried and the grief that sometimes still caught her unexpected. Despite the uncertainty of building a life in a world that kept trying to take it away. She was happy because she'd chosen this. Chosen love over safety, chosen connection over isolation, chosen to keep opening doors even when fear screamed to keep them locked. She was happy because she'd learned that the heart could break and heal and break again and still somehow keep beating. That you could honor what you'd lost while celebrating what you'd found. That grief and joy could coexist. That endings could lead to beginnings. That the worst moments of your life could somehow pave the way for the best. She was happy because on the coldest, loneliest night of her life, she'd placed a candle in a window and a lost soul had found his way to her door. And in saving him, she'd saved herself. As the stars emerged overhead and the fire burned bright against the darkness, Clara Greyhawk, widow, wife, mother, survivor, stood surrounded by the family she'd chosen and the life she'd built from the ashes of everything she'd lost. And she knew, with a certainty deeper than any she'd felt before, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The candle's light had found its way home, and home finally was wherever love led.